got an apology from the Deputy Mayor, who's heading off to Wellington to receive her honours tomorrow morning. So we'll have an apology. She may join us at sometimes, but we'll just see how we go with that one. Do we have any other apologies? Okay, there's none. So any declarations of interest? Well, Hannah is joining us.
If she can.
Yeah. So apology for lateness from Deputy Mayor. Councillor McCone, you're moving that, and Councillor Holding second. Thank you. Those in favour say aye, and against it's carried. So sorry. Any declarations of interest? Okay. Got for the public forum, we've got members of the Mahino Water Committee. So welcome along to you all. When you're ready to go, yeah, just push the microphone button and the floor is yours.
Good morning, Council. On behalf of Mahino Water Committee, I'd just like to introduce the members that are here. This is Alan McKenzie, this is our Chair Graham Fisher, and this is Ken Keane. He's past Chair and a long-term member of our committee. Thank you very much for the invitation to speak to you today. We have an agreement which is currently on the table, but it is not complete at this stage. I think that you will have had some communications, Paul, possibly. You would have had some communication from our solicitor around that. There are some things that needed to be ironed out. There were a few mistakes in the document, which I think that your solicitor has come back and mentioned to us. But with the greatest of respect, we would like to address the fact that when we were negotiating this issue with Council, we came to Council, as you know, because we have issues with our supply. Our supply has served the Mahino community for 85 years now, which is a very long time. And we met with members of Taumata Arawai, the board of Taumata Arawai last week, possibly the week before, I think it was the 10th of May. They came and had a look at our treatment plant, our pump house, which is treated with UV and chlorine disinfection. And they actually consider it to be quite sophisticated for this scheme that we run. Although our scheme is quite old now, our community has taken the responsibility to provide their own drinking water for decades, and our members have paid for our assets for 85 years. And this means that the rest of ratepayers in Oamaru have not had to subsidise our scheme in any way with any rates whatsoever. However, we have 127 people on our scheme, and it's not enough to fund and keep funding depreciation. In fact, our scheme really is just scraped by. But we find ourselves in a situation where we have, I'm not sure if you are aware of the issues that we face, but we have changing regulation, and we have an upgrade that's necessary if we are to keep running ourselves. This is quite an expensive upgrade for our community, and we just don't think we could fund it. We have a scheme supervisor who has previously worked on council's scheme for 30 years, well, no, 10 years, I think, but he's been involved with Mahino Water Committee for 30 years now, and he's 70 this year, and he needs to retire. This leaves our scheme without a qualified operator. So if we were to go to South Roads as an operator, our scheme could cost up to $90,000 a year. And that doesn't include a salary for anybody like myself to run it. We do that for nothing. but we don't have a succession plan. Members of our community are not interested in running the scheme if any one of us steps down. We understand that there are a lot of social pressures on people today and financial pressures, so we get that. So we're here. I don't want to go into that too much, except to say that we had a discussion with council. We had been compared to Reedston, the Reedston supply. Reedston joined the Kakanui scheme quite some years ago now. That happened because they had a water scheme that wasn't compliant. Oh, look, I know that we've got a time pressure here. But what I want to say is we were compared to them because we were told that our community needed to pay development contributions. And we had a discussion with council, and it was agreed that if our members joined up to the scheme and they gave the allocation detail to council by the 30th of April, possibly with a week or so grace, that we would not have to pay development contributions. So everybody did that. And we communicated this to our members, and they were actually really pleased with the outcome. We sit at a level 7 on the New Zealand Deprivation Index as of the 2018 census. And we think this is something that needs to be taken seriously because we have 127 people who cannot afford to take on the entire debt of a connection to the Hamneck line. We know that other communities have held the costs of their connections to the Hamneck line spread over a greater rating base than those townships like Hamden and the other small townships that have signed up to that scheme. We're told that's because they've paid for their assets, their council assets. But our members have paid for our assets over 85 years, and we will be giving them to council. So we're not really too sure what the difference is, considering that those assets are of similar age and condition, and our members being ratepayers have paid for them. So that means that our ratepayers will have paid for a council asset. So we want to be treated within the principles of natural law, natural justice. We don't feel that that's happened so far. There's not been transparency because we're now told that the development contributions will not be payable only for 12 months. And that's not what we were told. It's not what our members were communicated to them at the drop-in session. So what we think is that we've got a sticking point here, and that, yes, our members won't have to pay development contributions this year. We accept that for new connections, development contributions will be payable to the Mahina Water Scheme. But as far as existing ratepayers having in the Mahina district where we supply water to, having to be charged DCs after the 1st of July 2024 is really not what's communicated to our members. So we feel that if this is a sticking point for council, that what we need to do is we need to come to an agreement. And we know that there are other small communities that have these issues. Small rating base, it's not enough to cover the cost of $1,013,000 to join a scheme. I mean, what are these people going to be indebted with? How are they going to pay? In this year, rating year, possibly they will have 100% increase in their water costs. If DCs are imposed the following year, they could have another 100% increase in their water costs. We don't know that, it hasn't been quantified, but that's possible because we're told that that will be an extra $500. Now there's the cost of the loan. So we have to work out whether Waitaki ratepayers should be treated equally with transparency and in a non-biased fashion. And those are the principles of natural justice. And that's what we would like council to observe in the dealings with this agreement. This is something we've asked the whole way through because we now have an extra $50,000 added on to the cost for running our pump house for 6 months. When we said, we met with Oscar Smith, and we had a conversation where we said, look, we understand that it's going to take time to connect us to the Hamneck line. That's a 6-month possible period now we're talking about. And we said that our members would be happy to continue to operate the pump house as is. We have a water safety plan, and our water is compliant. And we reached an agreement, we thought, with Oscar, where we thought that, yes, that would happen, and that could happen so that Waitaki District Council could rate us for the coming year. However, that was arbitrarily changed, and it wasn't something that any of us agreed to. And now we're told that, okay, that's okay. We've got a contractor, South Roads will probably look after our pump house until we get connected. But that's an extra $50,000 cost that we didn't agree to. And we were told, okay, that's going to be covered by rate funding. And so are the DCs. But now we're told that's only for 12 months. So what we're seeking from council for this agreement to take place, because it has to take place. It can't not take place. If it doesn't take place, council will end up owning the scheme by default. Because we have told Taumata ROI that we will not be running the operator, we will not be the operator past 1st of July 2023. So we've tried to operate in a spirit of goodwill in our negotiations and good faith with council, but we're not feeling that on this issue of development contributions. And I say that with the greatest of respect. And I sat there, I listened to what Margaret and Caitlin were saying to our members at the drop-in centre. There was a discussion with one of our consumers who wanted 2 points and was concerned about if he changed it after the acceptance date, that he would be charged development contributions. And they were saying, oh no, that won't happen. We wouldn't do that. But if you come back to us, that's $500,000, $560,000 actually, approximately, of the cost for the connection to the Hamneck line. So we know that, and I can tell you that the UN General Assembly and Human Rights Council recognise the human right to safe drinking water that entitles everyone without discrimination to have access to safe, acceptable, physically accessible, and lastly, affordable drinking water for personal and domestic use. Now, this was adopted by the UN General Assembly in 2010. We want this to apply to our agreement with Council. We need those principles of natural justice to be observed. We are a community that, as I repeat, is not an affluent community. We've got people on very limited incomes who will struggle, as they are already struggling. So that's basically what we have to say about this. There are still things in this costing that we have that we didn't agree to. We didn't agree to installing tanks where none exist, because we know that those are consumer responsibilities. And we know that there are some people in our community who refuse to do it. But that's your bylaw. That's what's expected. That's what we've expected under our constitution, even though we've adopted a policy of lenience to those people. And they understand that they will not be able to call on us if they run out of water during a flood. So, yeah, so that's basically our position. And what we seek from council is a commitment to working through that issue fairly. We want to know that when Mahino Water Committee stopped supplying the community on the 1st of July, the community lose their advocacy, because as a committee, we can pay for legal counsel. But when we dissolve the committee and the society, our community no longer has access to legal representation. We will not be able to advocate for them as a committee, a water committee. So that's basically what I wanted to say today.
Thanks very much. And I guess just to basically go back to the beginning of this, we were approached by the committee, and actually what we've been doing is trying to deal with the Mahino water consumers as equitably as possible and as transparently as possible. And there's obviously some communications that haven't gotten across the gap, so we'll go into those in a minute. But as far as it goes, it is trying to work with the committee in the way that we work with anyone else, and it's not necessarily not just fair to compare it with other communities that were already ratepayers and then invested over the years through rates and paid higher rates along the way than what Mahino have. It's also comparing it to a new development, because that's more akin to what's actually happening, what the situation is here, where people who weren't our water consumers become our water consumers. And that's, I guess, a key difference. I do want to ask staff, though, what discussions have been had around development contributions with what you're alleging, because around this table we have not agreed to any waiving of development contributions in any way. Only that's basically, to explain that part of it, we built extra capacity in the Hamnack line so that new developments could be added on over time. Those new developments pay a development contribution, and it would pay for the loan that funded that oversizing of the pipe and capacity. If we add people on who don't pay the development contributions, it's using up that capacity and we're not getting the loan paid off. And this is where the problem is for us, is someone has to pay for that. And if the people who are benefiting from joining on aren't going to pay for it, it means that everyone else has to pay for it. So I'll ask Mr. Hope or Mr. Pacey just to comment on what's the basis of any commitments have been given around the 12 months and then in the DCs.
Certainly, Mayor Kircher. The commitment that was given was based on the requirement at the time that council would only be operating the scheme for 12 months, and then it would transfer across to the new water services entity. And the commitment was given that development contributions would not be charged in that 12-month period. And then it would just be a rate. So it was only ever a 12-month commitment, the understanding that the scheme would then transfer across to the water services entity, and we couldn't make commitments one way or the other as to how the water services entity would deal with such matters. So we were only speaking about the matters we had control of. Clearly, this development contribution issue became far more important with the decision to delay the creation of the water services entity. So every correspondence I have seen was always limited to that 12-month period. And so that's why it became an issue in the agreement, because if we were going to be responsible for it for a longer period of time, then we would need to take account of it in developing the long-term plan and the charging regime that would be attached to it. So I suppose that's our position. It was, one thing when we were going to operate it for 12 months and quite another when we were going to potentially operate it for up to 3 years.
So just to respond to a couple of other pieces of the UN rights to water, I mean, basically is supplying water, but it's not a right to free water or, at any particular cost.
We're not asking for free water.
No, but it's,
affordable water.
Yeah, it comes at a cost, and the cost is apportioned as as fairly as possible. So it's looking at that, and we need time to sort out some of the details around whether the waters go off to a new entity and so on, and we need to make decisions about how that might happen. There may be a decision to subsidise the water, but it's not something we can make now because the future is too uncertain around what is going to happen. You know, there's seems to be a misconception that Mahino is doing us, council, a favour. It's not that at all.
That's not.
And you know, we want to be very clear that actually, you know, we could take over the scheme and be spending money on day one to fix things, you know, because we don't know the state of the assets. They're not brand new assets that a developer would be handing over, investing in council if it was a new development. So there's challenges of that, but that's something we're willing to take on because you are our community and we want to make sure we're looking after our community, and there's a need here. You know, we can't expect Brian to work there forever for nothing, and yourselves as a committee to keep doing what you've been doing, which has been, you know, serving the community really well over many years. But unfortunately, it all comes at a cost because the people we will have doing things aren't going to be able to do it for nothing. So I've probably got a couple of questions for you before I go to other councillors. One is, do you believe the misperceptions around the DCs are sufficient, that we actually should delay things and go and talk to the community again about that?
I think you'll find that the community will be, and we haven't mentioned this to them yet, we haven't had opportunity to do that. We've only had a document from your solicitors on Thursday, and we were asked to sign it by the end of working day on Friday. We haven't even been able to meet as a committee, let alone our solicitor, to be able to consult with him because he's very busy at the moment, as my solicitors are. So we need time to speak to people. And I think that they will be very disappointed because the way it was put to us was not that we would get them for 12 months only. It was that they would be remitted because when Reedston joined the scheme, they did not pay. No consumer on that scheme ever paid development contributions. And we know this because one of our past members is a consumer on that scheme and was when they joined up to the Kikinui scheme. So we know that. We know what the circumstances were. We don't need to get into that.
So
because we know that.
Department of Internal Affairs paid it for them, which
we haven't seen any evidence of who paid what, to be honest.
I can tell you.
Yeah.
We were paid, DIA paid it. They'd funded an upgrade, which didn't go well. And they came to us and they said, if you join these on, we'll pay that contribution instead of that community. So if you can find someone to do that, that's great. But yeah, that was them. That wasn't us initiating that.
Yeah, no, I understand that. I think it was Southern District Health was involved in that situation. I understand that it's not comparing apples with apples, except for the fact that we are small schemes that have been taken over by council. So what we're saying is we just want a fair shake as a community. We know that water needs to be paid for. Water itself is free, but the means of supplying water is not. And we know that. And we keep saying that to our community. It is not free. We're not saying we expect to not pay for it. We're just saying we don't feel that we should pay more than any other ratepayer on the Oamaru to Moriaki Hamnet line, considering our ratepayer base and what they can afford.
Totally understand, but if those development contributions aren't paid by Mahino, everyone else has to pay them because there is a loan sitting there, $560,000 for that extra capacity that Mahino will take that won't be able to be taken by anyone else. So you can't sell something twice, and that's essentially what it is buying the share into that extra.
No, we understand that, but our point always comes back to the fact that we feel that we are being treated in a biased fashion because we are ratepayers and we have paid for our assets in the same way that those other communities paid for Waitaki District Council, and those assets had to be taken over by the Hamneck line for similar reasons to ours.
So
what
we've been maintaining all of those assets. We understand the condition and so on. There's depreciation funding that sits alongside them. There's a whole bunch of reasons. What we need to do is put together that information, and if it has been put together, we need to put together differently or something to make sure that there's clarity around why there is a difference between those people who have been paying the council water rates for many years at a higher level than most Mahino water rates have ever been. And your community's benefited from a lot of really good work that you've done and a lot of free work that you've done. Our other ratepayers haven't had that benefit, but unfortunately, this is the situation we've got now.
Some other ratepayers
So I've just got another quick question, and just want to clarify about the first 6 months. So if we can't do anything around connecting, or we can't get it connected for 6 months, you're prepared to carry on operating it for the first.
We did say that, but that saves $50,000. That's added to that cost.
Just clarifying that.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
But we're not prepared to continue indefinitely. There has to be. We have a timeline, and we'd expect that to be considered. And we need to stick to that as much as we possibly can. But what we want to say is that if you're determined that we must pay those DCs, and even though we don't agree with it, what we do want to see is that we know that there are changes coming. We may end up with a new government, and you guys might be able to fund your assets long-term, your water assets long-term, for the life of the asset, rather than a 20-year loan. So would you consider something like that? What we want is a commitment from council that you will act in the best financial interest of our consumers, considering their financial capability.
We will do our best to act in the best interest of all of our consumers. I think that's the important thing to take note. We've got $250 to $500 million of spending that needs to be done on water over the next 30 years or so. It's, we're not in a position to be able to subsidise everyone, and that's one of the major concerns around the water reforms. Councillor, sorry, I'm left you out of this whole conversation, but hopefully you've been intrigued. Anyway, do we have any questions? Councillor Hopkins.
Yeah, thank you. Right, so if I unpack this, it seems as though there has either been you believe there's been misinformation. Paul's explanation would suggest to me there's been a misunderstanding. Either way, there's a gap that we need to try and cross. Paul, if assuming that the delay in the handover of assets to the new 10-strong water entities does go ahead, if the DC were left as a debt, it would be inherited, as I understand it. The legitimate debts wouldn't be associated with water, would have been accepted by and adopted by the new entities. Would that be the case in this instance? Conversely, might some part payment of the DC for the short period of time before the entity takes over be another option?
There's been no change indicated to the approach that the water services entity will assume all approved water related debt. So we've already had reasonable discussions with the NTU about what would be water debt, and there isn't any dispute about our approach to it. So if there is a debt sitting there, it would pass across. And then, as I said, there are a variety of options open to council that it can contemplate with changes to the revenue and financing policy that can be introduced through the long-term plan. That's council has a revenue and financing policy that it needs to comply with, and so that essentially that is the offer. But the offer of an arrangement to Mahino is really the most favourable that can be offered under the current revenue and financing policy.
So just supplementary to that through you, Mayor Kuchar, would the DC be an accepted component of that agreed debt that you said there's been no dispute about what we've identified as debt? Could this be deemed to be part of that?
I mean, debts are a component of DC. It's not a one-to-one relationship. So I mean, it's far more complicated than that. Just all I can say is any debt that council has will be assumed by a water services entity if it is formed.
Essentially, yes, because it's a debt owed by those water consumers. So that's why we've said, well, we can hold things for 12 months, but then we need to, we can't confirm what's going to happen after that. And it's trying to make sure that we are being as reasonable as we can be, but equally understanding that what we don't know what's going to happen. October might change things drastically. We don't know. So, councillors, if there's nothing else there, we'll move on to the agenda. So thank you very much to committee members. We're going to do the just one set of minutes, and then we'll get on to the Mahina water supply agenda item. We've got that first because you, with the expectation you might stay on for that. So thank you very much for coming in, and we understand your concerns. We're trying to do the right thing by the Mahina community, but we also have to be mindful of affordability for everyone else as well. So that's what we're trying to do. So councillors, we'll go on to item 4.1, the minutes from the council meeting held on the 9th of May. So do we have Councillor Hopkins, you're moving, accept those. Councillor Cowles, any comments? I'll put it, those in favour, they be adopted, please say aye. Aye. And against, it's carried. Now moving on to 5.1, Mahina water supply agreement. On page 15, and Mr. Hope, do you want to introduce the report, please?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, this is reasonably time critical. We need to make a choice so that we can have a rate included in the annual plan to be set at the end of this month. If there's no rate included, then there will be no funding available for the Mahina scheme. I was going to say, the option that it essentially could be delayed at 12 months and it be fully resolved through the long-term plan process. However, the committee has now indicated that it would not be prepared to operate the scheme for another 12 months. So if that's the case, then yes, it is. I mean, it is important that this matter is resolved really at this meeting. As I said earlier, the circumstances did change quite significantly with the extension of the delay of the formation of the water services entity. All of the material I have seen was very clear that this was a 12-month arrangement for exactly that reason. And that was the information that was supplied to the committee and to the public. It was, again, the wording I've seen was never a cancellation of development contributions. It was merely saying that there would be no requirement to pay them in the first 12 months. To now try and include that in an agreement would be exceptionally difficult because so really the wording that the committee has suggested would that development contributions never be charged to the people that had signed up. That really does place quite a limitation on council in terms of its decision making, in terms of the future funding of water. even if it is only for essentially a 3-year period. In terms of, I suppose, requests for fair treatment, what has been suggested is, again, being treated consistently with the other parts of the Oamaru water supply area in terms of the rate being charged, proposed to be charged for the next 12 months. So really it's council needs to take a position at this meeting, and then that can be reflected in the agreement, which would then hopefully be signed off over the next period. But yeah, it's really, officers have taken this as far as we can. It's still within the revenue financing policy that we have, and the previous decision of council in relation to what would be offered to the Mahino community. So that was put forward and it was resolved sort of at the end of last year. And it's also what was included in the material that was taken out in terms of the consultation document in the annual plan. So there were, as we'll note in the next report, concerns from members of the community outside of Mahino about the impact that taking on the scheme may actually have on ratepayers in the broader Oamaru supply area. So it's probably easier to answer questions rather than for me to carry on talking to address issues that governance team may have, but really it does need council to take a position at this meeting in terms of what areas they believe can still be negotiated as part of the agreement and what parts really are bottom lines. So happy to take any questions.
Point of order. May I raise a point of order? We received, after we got the council agenda, an urgent item which related to the Mahino water supply agreement and the draft legal document. There are two recommendations in that later report. I think we have to actually move those before we can consider the two that are in the council agenda, because the recommendations there suggest that we receive for consideration the draft legal document and note the comments, but without receiving it, I don't think we can decide whether we actually adopt it or not. So I'm suggesting as a point of order that we address that first.
Yeah.
Through you, Mr. Chair, because the draft legal agreement was actually referenced in the original report, and it was said in the original report that it would be available on Friday from the lawyers, it was actually mentioned and advised that it would be issued. So I believe that you can take it. It's just that the document arrived from the lawyers at a later time, but it was mentioned in the original report. So I believe that it is part of the agenda. It was just getting it and then issuing it. Thank you.
No, I agree with that. So I'll decline your point of order. It is part of the agenda.
Yeah, okay.
There's the addendum. I think that's the hint. Councillors, any questions?
There you go.
Councillor Holding? Okay.
Well, I was going to ask, in the document, there are various elements of it that are highlighted in red, and one of those relates to DCs, and it specifically says that they won't be imposed before July 2024, but it goes on to say this doesn't preclude them being charged afterwards. Equally, it doesn't say absolutely and definitive that they will be, does it? Or does that statement indicate that they will automatically apply after July 2024?
No, it's not an absolute, because council will need to review its development contributions policy as part of the development of the 24 long-term plan. So, you know, it's essentially that process needs to happen before there would be any finalisation of development contributions.
Thanks.
I think the reality is, we need to know more about what is going to be happening in the whole context of water to be able to make a decision on what we need to do. I think the challenge we have is while we still control water, we've got a loan sitting there for the extra capacity in Hamneck line, and we need to deal with that. And that's if we still have that, if everything goes off to a new entity, then that debt goes with it, and then it'll be up to the new entity to decide how it deals with that debt. Councillor Blackley.
Thank you, Mayor Kircher. Mr. Hope, I was just wondering if you could answer under the current revenue and finance policy, what would be perhaps, say for argument's sake, a minimum kind of threshold that could be indicated in the contract? Because I feel like it's a very open-ended, there's really no idea about what way it could go for the consumers.
No, I mean, we don't know enough about the scheme. I mean, we could give an indication as to the development contributions that directly relate to Oamaru water supply. But we really don't know enough about the scheme in terms of other costs. So yeah, we could, if we could give them a number now, and that is the development contribution that would be charged under the current policy. But I don't think that's helpful to the agreement, because again, we're saying that is voided by saying we wouldn't charge it for the next 12 months. So, I mean, we can't really give any level of certainty other than this is what we're going to charge you for 12 months.
Okay. Any other questions?
So, yeah, just supplementary to that. So basically what we're saying here is that this is the arrangement for 12 months, and then we as a collective need to resolve how the arrangement might look in the long-term plan.
Yep, that's correct. So that's a matter that has to go out for consultation. So it would be formulated as part of the long-term process, and really as part of a review of the whole water waste, Three Waters charging and funding going forward.
Mr. Palmer.
Yeah, I think in terms of where we're at the moment, you've got a policy that essentially says that the community receiving the benefit of a service pays for that service in terms of water. And we've already signalled that, given the uncertainty around water, we're going to have a discussion around, how water, is paid for. But that needs to be an open discussion that's properly, consulted on. If we're going to move to a different model whereby different communities are subsidising other communities for their water, that is, a process that, we need to make sure that the whole community is aware of. And so in terms of where we're at the moment with our current policy, we've gone as far as we can with this legal agreement. We can't offer a term that would break that policy without going out to consult the community and without knowing the full consequences and implications of diverting away from that policy. And so whilst, we want to, help with the scheme, and we recognise, the burden this potentially poses for those ratepayers, to move away from that policy now, I think poses a risk to the council without going through a full consultation process on our policy about who pays for the cost of water.
Yes.
But based on the Chief Executive comments and also the answer to Councillor Blackwell's question from Mr. Hope, I'm prepared to move the recommendations with one very small change. I think recommendation 2, we need to add the word draft legal agreement. In other words, instructs officers to inform the Mahina Water Committee that the draft legal agreement has been approved. But with that very minor change, I'll move 3 recommendations.
I think once we've approved it, it's no longer a draft, but I think, that's the point. It's not.
Okay.
So it probably doesn't matter much either way.
No.
To be fair. Do we have a seconder for that? I'll second that from the chair. Do you want to speak to it?
Well, yes, look, this is an awkward and difficult situation, I think, for everybody. We need to understand the situations and constraints confronting residents in the Mahino area. Equally, I would ask those residents to accept that if a bill isn't paid by them, then it will be paid by other people who may be equally straitened in their circumstances and have other additional costs that they are confronted with. The draft agreement as it's written says that no DCs will be charged for a year. So we've got 12 months to work out alternatives and solutions. We also will know post-October much more clearly what the future might bring and be. And on that basis, we can start planning with more certainty and positivity. The agreement doesn't impose DCs as of July next year. It simply says that it doesn't preclude them being charged. And I would ask the Mahino community to accept that we understand the situation they are in, and that we will endeavour to try and work out an affordable and just solution that actually works best for everyone. And we've got 12 months to do it.
I think you covered things pretty well, Councillor Hopkins. I'd say for my part, it's we are trying to help the community and out of a difficult position, and acknowledge the good work that's gone on before. But as we're finding with all our water schemes, how things have been run in the past is not how they can be run in the future, with increased standards and compliance obligations and so on, and just the challenges of having to go and test water much more frequently, and all of those types of things where it's just really hard for volunteers to continue on. We want to make sure that we are doing things as best as we can and as affordably as we can, but it is still acknowledging that there are costs that have to be met. We're not a for-profit organisation that can just cut the profit back and give a discount. The money is what the money is. The money is needed, and if someone doesn't pay it, someone else has to pay it, and that's the challenge we have around that. So this doesn't mean that the committee has to sign the legal agreement, but it's giving our officers something to actually to get on with, and hopefully the committee can feel able to sign it with the knowledge that we will be looking over the next 12 months about how we can make sure that things are as affordable as possible. So we'll see how that discussion goes. But, we'll ask councillors, any other ones wanting to speak? Sorry, the public forum's over, so yeah. We're in debate now, so is anyone else wanting to speak? Okay, I'm going to put the motion 1, 2 and 3. Those in favour, please say aye.
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 Those against? That's carried. Thank you. Right, we'll see how things go from here. But thank you very much to the Audit Committee representatives for coming in today and sharing your concerns. As Councillor Hopkins very ably said, we understand those concerns, but we've got to look at how the whole community fares as we go through this particular issue. So anyway, thank you to staff also for the work that has gone on to get to this point, and hopefully the discussions from here go well. Thank you very much. Now, moving on to item 5.
You asked me a question which I answered.
No, I'd like to be speaking at public forum. I said I'll be speaking on an agenda item. At that stage, the agenda wasn't available.
Yeah, and I thought it was
Okay.
a question. So
So we can give you 5 minutes,
Yeah.
Mr. Henderson. Okay, so thank you, committee.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we're just going to go back to public forum and hear from Ray Henderson Right.
Yeah, good morning. Can't miss me out. Sort of following on from discussing about water, seems to be a problem in all sorts of areas. Regarding the setting of the rates, the annual plan for this year, I'm very worried about the inclusion of all the Three Waters projects, etc. And that's already been touched on by Alex about the problems of not knowing what's going to happen with affordable water. And we're obviously looking at October, could change things one way or the other. I think during the submissions hearings, which I think you're referring to as workshops now, it was mentioned quite often about putting stuff off, don't do anything before October because the whole world could change. I suggest that you do further than that. A lot of those Three Water projects have been brought forward, some as much as say 3 years. Don't do those at all in this annual plan year. Put them off until next year at the earliest, so they're LTP year 1, because you can't have them hanging over your head and saying, will we or won't we do them after October, because it's still part of this annual plan. You still have to set the annual plan in place by the 27th of June. So you can't have something that may be one way or the other. You've got to know what is going to happen. So I suggest that the optimum thing to do is to put those projects that have been, well, some have already been started, I believe, and you may be committed to. Some haven't been yet. I know that there's been projects that they're way beyond budget for the costs that have ballooned. So I suggest you shouldn't be doing those anyway. Just wait and see. So as much as possible, put the Three Water stuff off until at least, well, the earliest next annual plan year. So as I said, that was, that sort of suggestion come out of the workshops, the hearings. I see also regarding the reference to them as being workshops, I noticed that even the ratepayers Q&A was referred to as a workshop. So let's touch on workshops. I don't know whether the council is trying to ramp up their stats for having public workshops compared to the 68 closed ones last year, but we still want to push for as much as possible workshops being open. There's a general malaise, or not malaise, there's general uneasy feeling throughout the country, as we see by lots of media releases about other councils. The Ombudsman is certainly looking at 8 councils, I think, at the moment. We have asked for the public, for the workshops to be open to the public. Gary himself has indicated at least on 2 occasions he has no problem with that, but nothing has happened, and we want something to happen. So in the interests of information being available to the public, as the council used to be, the council used to be very open, public had information. I've seen a press release, well, editorial really, from Waitaki, and basically she was suggesting that because the public was so misinformed, she was basically saying the hearings are a waste of time. She seemed to indicate that we voted for the council, let them get on with it. I don't think that's very democratic. So I'd like us to have information to be able to sensibly submit to any hearings, submit to any consultations, and I think that can only be achieved by opening the public, opening the workshops, or bringing more stuff into the council chamber and not having it in workshops. And to that end, if it doesn't happen very, very soon, we will continue with it. We will approach the Ombudsman and ask him to investigate Waitaki along with all the other councils that he's currently doing.
Okay. Thanks very much, Ray. I think wasn't aware that hearings were referred to as workshops, so we'll see what the story is there. But that's fine. I mean, the reality is 68 workshops, about half of them were not workshops. They were information sessions, or they were training sessions. One was a walk up on a bit above the harbour. You probably could have been there for that one if you wanted. We could have shown you where the track is. There's been a whole lot of things loosely referred to as workshops that aren't workshops, and so one of the things we're doing is actually trying to clarify better and categorize better what sessions we are having, and trying to be fair to it. I mean, don't blame you for referring at all to that there were 68. I mean, we answered the question, what workshops have you had, and we listed them, and we referred to a whole lot of things as workshops, which was probably not the right thing in hindsight, but anyway, as far as being open to the public, I do support at least some of them being able to be open to the public, and I have some concerns that it might actually make some elected members more reticent about speaking up or asking questions, because no one wants to look like an idiot in front of the public. But you know, that's one of the compromises that might happen, but so be it. Not that any of us would look like idiots, I'm sure. Total confidence in my councillors.
If I can take you back to we'll call it consultation on the harbour plan, what was held in the ink box, I would say that would be called a workshop now, because there was a lot of discussion there. The council officers around, all the plans were there, but the public was interacting with them. That was a very open environment, and that's the sort of thing I'd like to see. Now, I think in the climate now, that particular discussion would have been taken behind closed doors, and all that would have been brought to the council table would have been the final decisions. So, as I say, there's a change in the culture of the council, which I don't like.
Well, I made the decision for that one to be in public, and I would make the same decision again. There were very good reasons to have it in public, and most importantly, so there was a better understanding that the consultant at the time brought back something which was just, totally did not accord with what the committee felt you should be looking at as far as the harbour went. So anyway, no, appreciate your comments. Thank you very much. Just quick checks, Councillor Holding, question.
Thanks, Ray. Obviously, you said there's some water projects that are costing balloon and we shouldn't do. What projects are you referring to that we shouldn't do for the community?
Without having access to the agenda, which is sitting over there somewhere, there was mention, I think it might have been under the Power Committee agenda, there was reference to some stuff had gone out by about 20%. So it was way beyond the budget. So I'm just referring to the figures that are actually in today's agenda. Again, it's what's in there. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thanks very much. Right, we'll get on to the next agenda item. Thank you. So councillors, 5.2 key directions for the 2023-24 annual plan, and we welcome staff along to assist with this particular item. Mr. Palmer, you want to? No, we'll hand over to Mr. Hope. Okay.
Thank you, Mayor Kircher. Ms. McIntosh will actually do most of the speaking on this item. Really is the day, again, another one where decisions need to be made. Process to work through the decision-making process is outlined on page 22. The matters that came up through the consideration of submissions that have a financial impact are noted on page 35, and then they are really the ones that we need decisions on, as well as confirmation of the projects, so that we can take this away, work on finalising the annual plan document and the calculation of the rates and the development of the rate table to go into the rates resolution, which needs to be adopted before the end of the month. So currently scheduled for the meeting on the 27th. So there is a bit to work through, and over to Ms. McIntosh to outline in a bit more detail how we're proposing to do that.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Kircher, Mr. Hope. As Mr. Hope's just mentioned, this is a key part of the reaching the adoption of the annual plan for the 27th of June. We just, this is a critical part to getting that direction for what is to be included in the annual plan, so that office can proceed to get that ready for adoption. There's a recommendation on the process for decision making here, and recommended that we just work through the attachments that have been included in this report. There's a lot there to go through. One of the attachments with the annual plan projects has been seen before, but the waters project have been reviewed, so we may want to look at that as well. So so if we want to start working through those attachments, I'll leave that to you, Mayor Kircher, how you want to proceed. go to attachment number 1, which is just the summary of submissions and additional information requested. Basically, I've included at the front just a summary of the key questions that we put into the annual plan document, which were presented at the last meeting as well. Just as a reminder, so they were the key topics raised. And then behind that is a response to additional questions that were raised at the hearings. So there's quite a bit of information there responding to those points, and there's some decisions there or some points there that need to be confirmed on how you want us to proceed with the annual plan. So if you wanted to raise any questions to that.
Okay, so if we go to page 29, attachment 1, so looking at the items that we asked for further information. Is there anything on that page 29? Councillor Holding?
Are you taking line by line?
Well, just going page by page at the moment. Okay, Councillor Blackler?
Number 247, the visitor information centre, there's the mention of the economic study. I'm just wondering if this is where it says council to confirm funding levels. So is that where we do this or later on?
Yeah, I mean, what's become clear is that there are question marks around the economic benefits of the Whitestone Civic Trust and the buildings that they operate. And I think we're at the point in time where we actually need to quantify that. Had a pretty good summary that came through on what the Ops to Ocean economic benefits were. And it would be very helpful to actually get something that did the same job for the Civic Trust, so that we have a better idea of how any support we might give to what was originally a partner organisation, how that might be benefiting the wider community. Perhaps ask staff if they've got an idea of what such a study might cost and how it might be funded.
I think that would be no and no. I think really, I think this would be, we've now recorded that. I think that would be perhaps a matter to be discussed after a decision is made. I think at the next meeting in relation to the EDA, because I think it would definitely sit inside of their purview. And we're going to have to make some decisions about the overall funding of that agency going forward. So I think it's perhaps a matter to be considered once that decision has been made.
Yeah, my concern is that puts it off at least a year, probably. This is not going to be an urgent matter for them as they get established. We can come back to that one. Anything else on page 29? Councillor Linwood.
Thank you. Have we had any more of a discussion about the shuttle service to Dunedin? I know that St John's have said it's at least a year away, which is a little bit concerning. I do feel like we should be looking at doing something.
Yeah, none of the long-term sustainable options that we need to put in place are going to happen immediately. There is an amount, I think, $15,000 that's been allocated in one of the adjustments, and yeah, probably that's looking at really subsidising someone who can operate the service in the meantime. But we haven't got anything more concrete than that at this stage. It would be good to understand, though, with St John, what that time frame is intended for. Is it to fundraise for the van and to get the volunteers, or if there was, if the council was mindful of a mind to give a donation towards the van, would that speed things up? So, yeah, no further information other than that. Okay, page 30, anything there? Councillor Hopkins?
Yeah, you're just looking at the at 236 and 237, the Awamoa Park toilet. I note here that plans for the toilet have been discussed with the roading team to ensure there are no issues. Not particularly well with us, I would make the point. I do have a question relating to who the toilets plans have been discussed with. Has anyone engaged with the Heritage Advisor on this matter, given that the oaks, I think, are listed and protected, and these are going to be adjacent to them? Has he been involved in the process at all?
I can't confirm whether the Heritage Advisor has been involved or not, but I can confirm that the oaks were considered through this and there has been discussions around the impact on the memorial oaks, not only from a impact point from visual and everything else, but also they actually disperse over the toilets and can impact actually growth on the toilets as well. So they have been considered, there have been discussions with people around that. But I'm not sure whether they've spoken directly to I can't confirm or deny either way on that one.
Supplementary discussions with who? Because if
this isn't particularly pertinent to the annual plan. So what I would say is, though, in response to the comments that have been made to that question, it's highly unclear as to why we might need any of the road reserve, and whether there was a license to occupy road reserve to allow the toilets to be back closer to the road itself, to the Awamoa, the junction intersection. That would be preferable rather than having a road reserve that then there's a setback from, which means it's pushed out closer to the middle of that area. So again, that's not part of the annual plan discussion in itself, but just to raise that. Just also raise on the event centre, the request. We're not going to be making a decision today on whether there's more funding there. It's been determined that the councillors need more information on the whole picture, including what the operating costs and loan look like, and how that might be shared across the district if it was to proceed. So there's going to be an information session on that before we make a decision. What we are being asked today, though, is just basically getting the cash flow right. So that's what the response has been to that particular submission. So that it's not saying how much money we're going to give overall, but it is saying how that money would come into council and how it would be expended, with the best assumptions being made on that. I don't know if Mr. Hope wants to add anything. So it's very much an accounting thing, this part of rather than an annual plan budget.
Yeah, I mean, really, we just need to reflect a realistic amount in the annual plan in terms of what could be spent and what could be funded. So that's really the only level of disclosure that will be included, and that's really just more of a technical process of we need to have something in the budget. Otherwise, we're just going to be reporting variances or just make it more complicated. And because it is embedded through the annual plan and has a number of impacts, even though it has no rating impact, we really just need a decision today or confirmation of the approach today, which is really just including an amount with an equal amount of funding, just so that there is a project to carry on with that doesn't commit council one way or the other in terms of overall funding or anything else. That just is effectively a placeholder in the plan. So
Thank you. Okay, page 31 gets into the Ahuriri Community Board ones, but there's some more detail on that in one of the following tables. So we'll deal with that then. Councillor Hopkins.
Yeah, two things on 31, 31, I should say. I'm curious to know why the Awamoa Park toilet has to be built by 31 December. And I'm curious to know why the communications team has been asked to give the facility its own character. I would have thought that might have been a role for a designer, an architectural designer or draftsman person. The other question I have with regard to the Ahuriri Community Board submission, the issue of dust crops up year after year after year. And at the bottom of the page, we're told a policy could be created. However, this is an activity that we have no funding for, or could get or can get co-funding. Now, Councillor Cowles has actually circulated an email to all of us indicating a range of products and materials that may actually be positive and effective in suppressing dust. It is a health issue. I believe we should actually commit to an experiment, either on Settlement Road, District Road, or both, to see how and what are the most effective ways of suppressing dust. And we should commit to it now, because it is an issue and it continues to be an issue. And we just continue to sort of kick it down the road. I'd like to see us act today.
Right. Grumpy Jim. So what are you proposing?
Well, sorry, I'm proposing that we request officers to conduct, I'd like to see us commence an experimental trials with identified products that may be effective in reducing dust on identified roads. And I would have thought it can be done in the existing roading budget with some reprioritising about which we have debated quite intensively recently anyway.
Okay. Family.
I'd just make it clear, like, we don't have spare money hanging around in budgets. If we're going to do it, it'll be instead of something else. So if you want us to come back with a proposal about what we might do and what we might not do instead, we can do that. But I think, making a commitment today to do something that's uncosted, that we don't know the consequences of in terms of what it means for the rest of the programme, I'm not sure would be wise. But if you want us to come back with a proposal about what we might do and what it might cost and where we'd fit it into the work programme, we can look at that.
Well, I would like it personally. Speaking for myself, I would like that, but other councillors obviously have to signal a view on the matter as well.
Councillor Blackman.
I would be supportive of Councillor Hopkins' concerns and investigating a way forward. And I think Councillor Hopkins, you've mentioned before that it may be that it's a user pays arrangement, which we help facilitate by purchasing materials in bulk if we can find some sort of sensible solution for people.
Councillor Cowles.
Yeah, look, I'd just like to echo those thoughts that I guess there used to be a simple thing of some oil put on these roads. It's no longer a viable or a sustainable operation, and whether there are other things that we can look at. But there's certainly an issue around a number of these roads that get brought up year after year. So, I think if there's some option to be looked at, would be appreciated.
Okay, noted. On the toilets, I believe the 31st December deadline is to meet the TIF funding subsidy requirements, and the comms team has been engaged along with Hayley, the events coordinator, to look at running a public competition for art on the toilets. So that's what their involvement is on that one. Okay, next page, 32. Just a quick question for Mr. Hope. There's the references to the UAGC, which Fed Farmers submitted on. It talks about the increase in what the UAGC is, but it doesn't tell us what the overall percentage is. Do you know what that number is at the moment? We're obviously up to 30% of rates can be UAGC, but do we know what that percentage is sitting at?
Best recollection is about 18%.
Okay.
As highlighted in some responses, because council also uses the 4 ward charges, which also, very much like a UAGC, so it's a fixed charge per separately used inhabited part. If you combine those two together, then I think Oamaru is actually over the 30%. And the other three wards are just under 30% if you consider those two together. But if we, under our current rating structure, if we move the UAGC up to 30%, then most residential ratepayers, they'd be seeing about 80% of their rates as a fixed charge when it was combined with the ward charge and the fixed 3 water charges. So yeah, I suppose that's putting that request in a bit of context. Again, it will be something that will be monitored closely as we review the rating system and impact over the next 12 months.
Thank you. That's helpful. Councillor Hopkins.
Yeah, just 224, the Wahimo Community Board's submission regarding Hamden, and the officer's comment is would need to defer the project to do this, likely done through in wastewater defer and push back to do done through in options 40,000 in 24-25 and build in 25-26. Now, aren't we obliged at this point to make a decision? I mean, again, what officers have said is, yes, you can do this now, the Hamden study or feasibility, but you'll have to postpone something else. So isn't this the day that we decide whether we are going to do the Hamden study and postpone something else or not?
This is the day, and we have to do Hamden, but it's my opinion. I think it's addressed in one of the tables coming up. So yeah, we'll go into more detail there. Anything else on page 32? And 33, I just note it's got the museum contribution. Dunedin City Council confirmed their contribution is increasing by 5%, and my belief is we shouldn't go more than what they are. Makes very little difference in the dollar amount, but it's if we're keeping proportionality with the other funding partners, then that's at least we hit 5%, that would keep it same. Any comments? Saves us $1,000, I think.
Sorry,
saves about $1,000. It's not meaningful, but it's on the principle that Dunedin gets the most benefit by far out of the museum, and we shouldn't be contributing more than we need to.
well, speaking to that, we don't have to contribute an extra cent more. We were told that by Mr. Griffin himself, Dr. Griffin. We have a percentage that we're required to pay. The request is to pay a bit extra. We don't have to do it. If we want to, if we choose to do so, then that's up to us today. But it's not obligatory. We've been told that, I think, by the museum staff and by our own officers.
Okay, we've got it on an item line, so we'll come to it, and people can think about it in the meantime. Okay, page 34 is the summary of the rate elements and what we're looking at there. Mandy, do you want to speak to this particular one, or Mr. Hope, you're poised, ready to speak? There we go.
Oh, I was only going to say that we might need to have coffee and chocolate before we dive into the next two tables.
Oh, it is that time. Get so engrossed in this stuff. So we'll take a 12-minute break. Thank you.
What?
Right, welcome back, everybody, and we are on page 35 on the agenda, and Mr. Hope's had his coffee and biscuits now, so he's all ready to launch into this one. So, Paul, do you want to speak to this, or will I go to Mandy? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So on the first page that is presented is items that we've already discussed at various workshops and have been later confirmed at council meetings with change there. And then on the following page, we have then included items that were presented through the submissions process that have requested financial assistance, and breaks down on also what the community boards have sought. So if you want to work through those, Mr. Napier will make any adjustments as we go through, which will reflect at the bottom where there is a rates impact. Some of these, depending on how they are funded, will not have a rates impact. So if there's no change, that's because of that funding for that. So I'll leave that over to you, Mr. Kitchen.
Okay. Councillors. Just wait for these couple of latecomers. Okay, Councillor Hopkins.
Well, and on page 35, basically the three things that you're seeking us to confirm definitely, there may be others as well. I do have a question about parking further down, but just for the benefit of the public as much as anything, the three requests that we may confirm today are the North Otago MTB Club request, the Civic Trust increase in visitor centre funding, and you'd like to see us go up 5% on the museum. Is that correct, Makucha?
Well, I'm just noting that around 7%, DCC's gone for the 5%, and I don't think we should be going more than what they did.
No.
So just on that one, is everyone happy that we, for the museum, that we allow for 5% increase? Okay, so we do that one. Looking down through the list, that's where there's provide the shuttle service to Dunedin Hospital. Do you want to comment on that one in particular, Mandy?
On the shuttle service to Dunedin, there is a new service provided to Dunedin for door to door, which is a commercial operation. They have got ACC support, and they've also given benefit to disability people. But again, it's a commercial business, and it is costs individuals to utilise that service in line with what the other community trusts have been doing, and I think Waitaki and other areas. So that business just opened up a couple of weeks ago, so it's early days, but they've got a shuttle van as well as a couple of cars running. But it's a very different service to what St John are looking at putting on when that's available for passengers going directly for hospital services only.
Councillor Blackman.
So are you able to give us an indication of what the costs are to people at the moment if they're utilising full benefits available?
Sorry, as all I can advise is that I know that they are ACC registered, so that they can get benefit through that. I do know that they are giving, I think it was a 75% mobility discount is what I think it was on their website, and that's unconfirmed. And I'm not sure of the rates off the top of my head. I'd have to go and look at their website, which is it's door to door, DOOR number 2 door. So that information is all readily available, but I'm sorry, I don't have that on hand with me.
Supplementary to that, I just think I think my view is that we need to look to provide some, well, at least understand in detail the affordability aspect of what's on offer at the moment, and if it's prohibitive to members of our community, then I feel we should be plugging the gap until St John's have a solution in place for Oamaru.
So the 15, was that just a number that was plucked out of the air, or was there a calculation behind it?
No, I believe that figure was a figure that was muted at the last, during the hearings of whether we considered doing something to support a commercial operation. I think you mentioned that at the last hearings as something we wanted to consider. So it was just on that basis that that figure was put in there.
Okay. I think we need to have more discussions and so on before we can actually know whether we are going to need that one or not. It might be handy if we can understand if there's any other funding that could potentially be used for that, some non-rates funding, to allow us to make the call. You know, if we don't get something agreed before the 27th of June, that it can still be worked on.
Just to confirm, do you want us to leave that number in but come back with more information on the 27th, or do we take that number out?
Yeah, well, I think it's probably some of us happy to have discussions with the operator and get a better understanding of what potential subsidy might look like if it was that particular operator, and yeah, go from there. Okay. Yes, Councillor.
Matter of parking. I was under the impression when we were considering submissions the other day that we had generally agreed that we would keep the 1 or 2 hours free parking in the morning, but reinstate charges as of July 1. And yet the report here appears to be giving us effectively kicking for touch and leaving a whole range of 1, 2 or 3 options, whereas I thought we'd actually essentially settled on one.
There was no confirmation. What we were asked to do was bring forward the submissions that were raised for decision on those. So all those that where financial requests were asked, we put those forward. And as far as that parking, no decision was made. It was to have more conversation to bring here and make a decision at today's meeting if appropriate to do so. So it might be best to work through those lines line by line to confirm whether you want to make the funding that was requested. We were asked to bring all of those here to this meeting for decisions on those. There was no decision made on any of those fundings, and we've put them all in for your determination on that. So it might be best just to go through from top to bottom to make that a little bit clearer for everybody.
Okay, Councillor Thompson, were you wanting to comment on the parking?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. No, I was actually wanting to speak on a previous issue. In terms of the transport, it's commendable that we're discussing trying to subsidise the service when in fact Otago Regional Council rate for this very purpose and have been conspicuous by their absence in our space. And I would suggest we need to be talking to them with some vigour on this issue.
Absolutely, and yeah, the last thing we want is them ducking for cover. But the challenge for even for them is that they'll say they haven't rated for this particular service, so they're not in a position to start it up. We've got to absolutely get them around the table and motivate them to actually do the right thing. So I'll be talking to the chair next week at the Otago Mayoral Forum, and we'll be looking at this in more detail. I believe the discussion that involved staff members wasn't as optimistic as we might have hoped. So we have to encourage the governance team to get on and make it happen. But again, that's the longer term solution. I don't think they're going to be up for any short-term solution that gets us through the initial issue that we've got. If we go to the parking, just a quick question on that. So in the rates examples we gave, it showed Oamaru CBD properties as having quite a large increase. Now that's based, we're told, on that we were not going to be having metered parking. And so the assumption was made that the subsidy that came from metered parking to offset the business rates wasn't going to be there. Obviously that caused a concern for business people and others, that there was this big increase in the Oamaru business area. So that went against the decision that we were extending free parking through to the end of June, but then metered parking would continue from that 1st of July. Do we know which one is which is which as far as what was intended? Mr. Hope.
Yeah, so item 1 would be returning to the status quo, well, that we've had, where it's a couple of hours free parking and then charging after that. There was discussion about not only doing that, but then increasing the parking fees as well for when we are charging the parking. So that would be the impact of item 2. And then the third one was really utilising the existing reserve to basically take that rate back to where it was, because there is a significant reserve sitting there, both combination of depreciation and rates build up. So that could be utilised to essentially limit that impact on the Oamaru business rate. It was also positively affected by the adjustment on the previous page, where it was realised that the meters were fully depreciated, and therefore that depreciation did not need to be funded in the 23-24 year, which the initial budget included. So they're already, that has although it has a small impact on the overall rate requirement, it has quite a reasonable impact on the requirement in terms of the Oamaru business rate. So it's really all of those solutions would have a positive impact on the Oamaru business rate primarily.
Yeah, so essentially what we had was examples that went out and said, we are going to continue on free parking, we're going to rate the business area for more. And if we don't need to rate the business area for more, there should actually be, if we were going to go back to paid parking, we didn't need to collect as much rates from those businesses. So that should have been an automatic decrease in the overall rate requirement.
Yes.
So that hasn't shown anywhere here. So there's, remove free parking, which was what we thought we'd essentially the situation we had, but it's showing a 0%.
Oh, sorry. No, that's because so the first 5 items, because there was sort of general agreement around the table at the deliberation session, they have been included, whereas all of the other items, they need a specific decision. And once a decision has been made, then that will flow into the calculation. So the remove the free parking, so that would have a positive $50,000 impact on the rate requirement. So that's the -50 showing there, but that hasn't been moved over into the 0, because we need a decision today about which one of those options you want included in the final budget. So so we need decisions on each of those items in the second part of the table. So hopefully we've stopped talking at cross purposes now.
Yeah, I mean, just say for clarity, those first 5 items were discussed at a workshop. They haven't been formally confirmed, so you'd still need that as well for confirmation.
What ones are we talking about?
Yeah, I'm sorry, they weren't formally resolved to be included.
Which clarification, in case paranoia breaks out in epidemic proportions, it wasn't a workshop, it was the conclusion of the submissions days.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it was a directive rather than decision that was made at that stage. So whilst those first 5 items have been plugged into the calculation, they haven't formally been resolved by you. So you need to do that. And then any other items in that list would need to be formally resolved as well.
Okay. So these 5 up here. So we're not talking parking when we're talking 5. No, okay.
But
was confusing.
essentially anything that you want included in
Yes.
that list.
Yep.
Yeah, it isn't formally in there at the moment. It's, those first 5 have been put in there as an indication based on the discussion at the after the hearings. The others haven't been included because there didn't seem to be any emergent direction from those hearings.
Okay, so well, let's just stick on the parking because we're there. So removing free parking, it seemed like there was about $170,000 shortfall from full metered parking to 2 hours free and then metered parking. But returning or removing free parking was only a $50,000 gain. So is that number accurate?
That's the best calculation we have.
Okay. Right.
Any resolution?
No.
So, Councillor Blackler. Yep.
On item 2 in the parking, what would the parking fees be increasing from and to?
I think it was increasing like $1 an hour.
Councillor Cowles.
I think around parking, I think, option 1 and 2, I mean, this is a year where we're trying to get rates down. We're trying to be affordable. Parking in itself, $1 for an hour is more than affordable compared to most places. But I think those 2 combined help us move towards overall rates being more affordable.
Yeah, I think the thing is, we need to keep working on the long-term solution for parking in Oamaru, and there's definitely strong support for continuing the 2 hours, and that might be the interim move. But equally, I don't have a problem with increasing the rate after those 2 hours. If people want to stay longer, then they do pay more, which would gain a little bit extra revenue through that. And if there was a need to use a bit of the reserves to keep us going through. But I think, we seriously need to look at the options. Staff have done some work on that, and looking at the technology and whether it's replacing the technology within the machines, or whether it's replacing the machines themselves, or whether it's some other hybrid. Looking at those, but I personally think we need to stop kicking this can down the road and deal with it. But in the meantime, as we get through the winter period and so on, I think people are appreciating the couple of hours of free parking. So, it depends on which options we want to go with overall. Councillor Blackler.
Mr. Cook, at the last conversation, you indicated a potential issue with increasing the fees. Is that right? Is my memory serving me correctly there?
You'll need a microphone.
You mine, Roger. No, okay.
No, the issue I raised was if you change the time. So if you go from 2 hours free parking to 90 minutes free parking, the benefit I don't believe would be particularly great in terms of revenue when you consider that we'd have to change all the signage, stickers on the machines, all the PR communications around the change. I don't think the relative return would be beneficial.
So Councillor Holding's back in the room, but your seat's been taken. Councillor Hopkins.
Look, this is a lot of time has been spent on this. I think Councillor Cowles has put a good and persuasive case. I sense that you're, whilst wanting alternative or better solutions longer term, are willing to back it in the short term. And I would suggest that we embrace options 1 and 2, but keeping the free parking hours as they are now.
So 1 is remove free parking.
Well, that's all day, but it's not. It doesn't involve
So basically, I mean, currently it's the first 2 hours free, so we want to continue that.
Yes.
But increase, the hourly rate.
Correct.
Mr. Cook. You can become the deputy mayor if you like, Mr. Cook.
Ideas, but
Yes, just to clarify, the 2 hours free parking starts from 10 AM onwards currently. So we're effectively giving parking up till midday free of charge.
I think that's problematic because it ends up with people being able to park there all morning, and I think it's 2 hours total free parking. We maybe just clarify that, and so if they're there at 9, they get through to 11. Yep, seeing nods around the table. It makes more sense, I think, and than enabling a whole lot of people to park the whole morning without paying. So anyway, we'll see how we go. Mrs. de Cook. Yes.
And do you want us to do calculations as to what that means for permit holders? Because currently the equivalent discount has been provided to permit holders.
Well, yeah, it was always a bit of a surprise that it applied to permit holders because off-street parking was, it can be at a premium, and then they still provided them with permanent parks for a fairly small amount on a per day basis. So I don't know, councillors, is this something you want to apply to permit holders? A discount to them, or is it just that's going to be the cost for having a park? We're not.
Sorry, I was just being silly. Are we the permit holders?
No, permit holders are often like the hospital has quite a number of permit holders, for example, that allow staff vehicles to be parked there, and particularly some of the operational staff that are out and about doing things, and other business employees or business owners that pay for permits. Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've actually got my hand up for a previous discussion, so I'll keep quiet if you promise to come back to me when we go to the top of the list.
Oh, well, yes, we will do that. Thank you. Okay, we need to deal with the detail separately to this, but if we can proceed with continuing the 2 hours free up to 2 hours maximum free, and then with an increase per hour after the first 2 hours. Okay. It's not. Okay, so going back to the top, North Tiger Mountain Bike Club request for some extra funding. Any comments on that? Councillor Linwood?
I personally don't feel overly happy to proceed with it. Councillor Thompson made a comment a couple of weeks ago that we can't be everything to everyone, and I do think that it applies in this case. It's just how I feel.
Okay. So you're proposing 0?
Or half. I would go 0, but I don't want to be too mean. Maybe half.
Okay, so half.
Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Thompson, right, back to you.
Yeah, thank you. Look, this is a good case of where we've got a club that's doing a valuable service for the community. However, it only has 40 members. They're asking for $7.5K increase in their funding, and there's a whole lot of other opportunities like this. We would love to help our community, but at the end of the day, we're asking our ratepayers to pay for things that are nice to haves, not need to haves. And it's not a personal thing that I'm opposing an increase. I think in these times we need some austerity, and I'm more than happy to maintain the existing 17K, but the extra 7.5 to me is symbolic of a spending in an area where we can't afford to at this time.
Thank you. I'll argue differently. Because they've only got 40 members and because the tracks serve so many members in the public, much broader range of people, including helping with the tracks in Palmerston, I'd support an increase of $3,000 to this particular one. Councillor Blackler?
I think I just want to understand, does the same logic apply to the discussion we had around Palmerston, whereby we've sanctioned further increase in meters of track from a council perspective, which is therefore placed pressure on the maintenance requirements?
Well, I think it's kind of chicken and egg. I mean, we definitely want to support increases in tracks where viable, but equally it's not an open checkbook either, I think, is the message that we need to send. That what can they afford to do with the money that we've got, and basically find the right balance.
That's supplementary to that. Is this the primary reason for this request?
I think it's increase in tracks, but probably a bit of inflation in there as well.
Mr. Mayor, the Waihemo costings, that there was an initial grant or assistance from North Otago, but all the rest of the funding has come out of the Waihemo Community Board.
Yeah, that's the ratepayers too, Jim. Yep. Thank you. Councillor Hopkins.
Yeah, I think from memory, that submission, they told us that there'd been a 25% increase in the track length. I remember asking officers whether this was just something they'd chosen to do, and we were told that we had sanctioned this and approved it. Whether we requested it or not, I don't know. But to the extent that we said, yeah, fine, go ahead and do it, I felt that the request for the additional funding was not unreasonable. But if we're going to be constrained and concerned, then perhaps we pull it back from 6 to 3.
Yeah, we didn't request it. We did sanction it, but it wasn't with any understanding of that there would be extra funding. This has taken more than $3,000 time of talking. We're stuck on minor details. I mean, there's a need to move on. So unless anyone's absolutely going to die over $3,000, we'll move on. Okay. Whitestone Civic Trust. I'm certainly supporting the increase to $50,000. It's a decrease overall of $50,000, but it allows them to get on and provide a service, which they've already shown in this first 4 months is over 40% growth in numbers that they're serving. They're doing a good job. People are looking for face-to-face interactions, and they're increasingly finding where the information centre is. Councillor McCone.
Yeah, look, I'd just like to cover it off. At some stage, we're going to have to be a bit more hard-nosed. We have needs and we have wants, and we've got to define what is the need and what is the want. And a business decision. So across everything, there's got to be some input from those that are asking for funding as well. There's got to be some show that they're actually out there helping themselves. We're not a bank. We're supplying funds for the whole of the district. And yeah, I think the visitor centre, look, we have the geopark being done, and I think at this stage we're in a position where we can't deny it, but I think we need to look at the whole process.
Any other comments? Okay, move to the next one. Did we finish off the museum?
Yeah.
Okay, we did. Ahuriri Community Board and Waihemo Community Boards requests for increasing their budgets to have more of them attend the conference. Councillor Cowles.
I guess, 9 years on a community board, I attended 2 of those conferences and found them quite valuable to actually get me in the mindset, and probably part of the reason that when asked to put my hand up, I'm here now. So I think having some formal training, it can feel like you're just sort of a wee bit stuck, battling in your own region, but when you actually get to the local government or, to some of that training and understand that there's other communities that have got some really good ideas, it can certainly help the thinking around the table, the community board table. So I'd certainly support some more training along those lines.
Thank you. No one else? Okay, that's in. Thank you. Right, moving down to parks for small dogs. Not proposed to be in, but proposed to be included in discussions for the long-term plan. We're happy with that. Western Civic Trust grant to offset loan interest. $21,000. Any comments on that? I'm going to speak in favour of this. When you look back to the beginnings of the Civic Trust, it was very much a partnership between what was then the Borough Council and Council and the community, sorry. Looking at how we save a whole lot of our heritage buildings, and over the years they've done a very, very good job of that, and there's been a heck of a lot of community input into it. The councils over the years haven't matched that enthusiasm for funding. We have done more than I think what some people appreciate, but this is an opportunity for us to actually recognise that. I think we do need to get an economic study done on what the benefits of the trust go, and that would involve talking with the tourism sector, Tourism New Zealand. It would involve talking with the film industry, and a lot of the other accommodation providers and so on in town, to understand how much of an identity those buildings are for Oamaru and the Waitaki District. So my proposal is that we do offer a grant of $21,000 to be funded from the ground rents, which they are now paying market rent. They didn't used to. But there's an opportunity to actually fund it from a non-rate source. It's harbour endowment land. These buildings were built because of the harbour. This is looking after those buildings. So there's some reasoning behind why we might use that funding source. So that's my proposal. Councillor Blakely.
100% echo the comments you raised, Mayor Kircher.
Thank you. Any other comments?
Mr. Mayor.
There you go again, Jeff.
Yeah. On behalf of the rural ratepayers who are facing a 13% rate rise, again, I ask the question, are we overspending our budget? At the end of the day, I again agree that the Trust are doing a magnificent job, but it seems to me ironic that we're giving them money to cover the money that's already been borrowed for some length of time. We seem to be on a bit of a treadmill there, and maybe we need to actually seriously revisit how the Trust works in partnership with us.
We absolutely do need to do that. In the meantime, that's not going to happen in this before the end of June. So I'm proposing we do something about it now. Totally understand what you're saying, but equally, if the Trust had challenged the last valuation for ground rents the way they had previously, they wouldn't have been paying as much as what they are and what they have paid over the last several years. That was missed because of change in personnel at the time, but it has meant that we've gained a lot more out of the ground rent than what we would have previously. Councillor Hopkins.
Yeah, look, I tend to endorse Councillor Thompson's comments. I believe we are entitled to have a clearer set of agreed expectations and and strategies, if you like, between ourselves and the trust. And I think we have to look very clearly and carefully at who we appoint to the board, and get clearer and more regular reporting back from them. At the moment, it's been a black hole down which from which no comment or information emerges.
Hold on, I think you're making a totally inaccurate.
Well, we haven't
comment
had
there. It's one thing to have an opinion, but to describe that there's been no communication, I think you're just wrong.
Well,
They were here just last week.
Well, we had a submission on the annual plan, yes, but in terms of having appointees representing the council on the trust, I can recall in the early days I was on this council that those representatives reported to council in public session regularly. That has not happened for years. And I'm relieved, if we do agree to this, that the 21,000 is not coming from rates. But I still don't think that we've had an honest and provocative conversation with the trust that needs to be had, because they've spent a lot of money on furbishing the kitchen in the Criterion Hotel. They've told us that. In theory, they should be generating a lot of income from those expenses. In theory, like any other person who's borrowed money to make property improvements, they should be able to cover the mortgage cost or the interest charges. And okay, we forfeit $21,000 of rental income, which simply means that our property portfolio looks worse, and it's not good now, looking at the strategy we're going to adopt soon.
Which is why I made the point that they would have had a discount if they'd actually applied for it, as they used to have on the ground rental. So it's trying to show that actually we're no worse off than what we would have been as far as the general discount that we would have given. Yes, they've invested in the kitchen. I mean, we want them investing in the buildings. We want them used, but we know how expensive it is to look after old buildings. We've got a bunch ourselves, and we can't operate them for anywhere, the same cost as a modern building. It's just the reality of it. Got to be realizing that, and there's got to be, we talk about imposing rules on farmers through district plans and so on, and cutting their productivity, and the community needing to actually recognise that. And ideally, if it's in the national interest, that the central government pays for that cost to farmers. This is the same thing, except it's heritage buildings, and it's the wider community that benefit. And that's why we need to get this, get a study done on what the economic benefits are of the trust, and actually get the whole picture, as has been mentioned as well. So anyway, I'm just going to ask for a show of hands. So those in favour of allocating 21,000 from the ground rent, will you raise your hands, please? Those against? Okay, that's included. Moving to.
Sorry, can we have a count, please?
No, I did. It was 6-3. Thank you. Moving to the west ceiling of eastern or western ends of District Road. Any comments on that one? Probably fits under the same as Settlement Road, looking at options around dust suppression. Councillor Hopkins.
Yeah, look, this is a matter that's got, now I admit I know Graham Clark, so if you like I can declare an interest, but I could also have advocated for other people in other circumstances who brought to us repeatedly a request. Now in this instance, I can't see how you can allocate $250,000 to do all of a road or one end of it. And I would have thought, because there are references elsewhere in this agenda today to the policy we have, that residents, if they contribute, we will do some sealing. I believe we should actually commit to having an engagement with the residents of District Road to see if they would like to say 50 or 100 metres from Western Road south sealed, with the proviso that they pay the agreed amount of money that's in the policy, 50 or 57%. And I think we should talk to them about it.
Well, I think we can talk to them. It's loan funded, so if it needs to be raised at that time, as a report come through to us, we can agree to it at that point. So it's quite happy to support that. And if you want to, initiate that discussion, that would be probably fine too. But we'll talk to the rating team about what works best overall for them. Extending Coronet Road footpath, Tata, and pedestrian lanes. Councillor Cowles is the ward councillor. This has obviously come from the Mahariri Community Board in response to community concerns.
Yeah, so I guess the Coronet Place footpath, there are two properties where it doesn't go past. Obviously, in the flooding last year, brought a bit of it certainly wouldn't have saved them in that particular thing, but we've seen flooding since, in light of flooding, we've seen it coming down Coronet Place, and it would help divert the water around there. Both homes were harmed, one in particularly quite badly. We've got a reasonable amount of funds, I think about a little over $170,000 sitting in our amenity rate. So I think it's a reasonably good investment to continue that around the corner and help alleviate some of the issues around flooding there. The pedestrian lanes, again, we've seen a major increase in the usage around our town all year round. It used to be an off season of 5 or 6 months of the year, and now we have an off season of about 4 weeks of the year. And so there's a lot more use, a lot more people walking through these lanes. Again, with flooding, we've seen them scoured out and lots of repairs done to them. And, I guess by sealing, we're going to reduce the need for weeding, build some resilience in there in the case of more flooding, and make them, I guess, a little bit more usable for our constituents. So,
right. Thank you. Basically, we can include those. The funding's already there, so it doesn't need to be a rate impact. So then onto the Waihemo Community Board. Sorry, didn't do the Kura Bridge. What did I skip there?
Sorry, the question, isn't it the same?
Sorry, I've jumped here. So the Kura one is the same as far as this funding in the amenity rate, so that's can be included at no rate increase. That's fine. I jumped over the Puketapu track. So as far as that one goes, looking at whether the CBD allocation of funding from Better Off funding can be switched from that project to this project. Mr. Hope, you comment on that one?
Well, we first need an indication from council that there is a desire to talk to internal affairs that's running the internal affairs, whether they would be happy with that switch, but we'd need basically a decision from council first before we started the negotiations with internal affairs.
It's an economic development project for Palmerston either way, so it's not changing the nature of that, but certainly feedback from the community board is they prefer this particular project. But Mr. Palmer, your comments?
I was going to say, with everything else we've got to deal with, we don't necessarily need to deal with that one now. We've got an item coming up at your request on updates on the Better Off funding allocations and progress with those, so it might be better just to deal with it as part of that overall overview of the Better Off funding.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Settlement Road. Again, we've mentioned that before, is dust suppression. So moving on to Waihemo Community Board, feeder streets to schools. So this is about footpaths on those feeder streets, I believe. Is that right?
Yes.
Mr. Mayor, there were 3 streets originally approved. budget restraint meant that we only got 2 of them done. So Cope and Shah is the 3rd of the streets that was originally desired to have footpath access down to the school, bearing in mind that there's a considerable number of new houses also on Cope and Shah Street now. So that's our desire there.
Okay. And yeah, so internal loan. Do we know what's in the Palmerston Amenity Rate Fund?
Yes, I can tell you that. The amenity rate currently has 176,000 in it.
Right. So this will use a chunk of it, but if it's loan funded, then it can draw down on that over a 10-year period, something like that, Mr. Hope.
Well, I think we'd probably, once we actually free up some resources to do some work on this, probably put something to the community board suggesting either they fund it directly from that balance in the amenity rate, or I think for the amount involved and the size of the rate, yeah, it would be 10 at the most, maybe even like a 5-year loan or something relatively short, just so it doesn't, there is capacity to do some more work in the township.
Yeah, my concern is making sure there is some powder dry for the community plan when that is developed. Okay. Moving the Puketapu track and mountain bike track included already. Skate park fence in Palmerston, so just extending that alongside the bike park, I believe. So that's funding there, Jim.
That's correct. That's just an extension of the fencing along the waterway that has already been done. So it's an extension to that. The extending the Moonar Street walkway is a desire to extend Moonar across District Road and down to link up to the mountain bike track area. The increased rubbish is mainly a weekend problem that's been identified where the bins aren't emptied enough, and the Hampden Sewage Scheme is self-explanatory. We gave the community an undertaking that we would give them some information. 12 months has almost drifted by and we haven't done that. And the reconsideration of a Lincoln Street footpath in Hampden is the linkage between the shops on the main road with the holiday park down at the beach, and anyone walking up is required to walk up the road. There is no footpath there at all.
Do you think that one should wait for the community plan and possibly long-term plan? It's using up a chunk of money.
Yeah, and to be fair, Mr. Mayor, it's not a particularly easy one because there was major earthworks going to be required. It narrows down, but it has been talked about in my 2 years on the community board, so it's definitely has the support of the community board.
Yeah, no, thank you. I think with the rubbish bin issue, particularly the one at Meraki, is the big problems, the containers used by the fishwife takeaways there that fills the bin up very, very quickly. And I think we need to look at what the type of bin is, something that doesn't get clogged up so quickly with large containers. It's a bit more than just adding another rubbish bin, or increasing the frequency of emptying. Just an observation for staff. Right, moving on to.
Sorry.
Yep.
I think we need to resolve the Hampden Sewage Scheme matter. This is a line item now.
Right, sorry. So we all agreed on that, didn't we?
Well, we didn't agree on it. We said that
sorry,
we had an
I'm looking. We all agreed on that, didn't we, councillors? Yes. Lots of nodding going on.
Sorry.
We've agreed on it.
Well, okay, we've agreed on it. Does that mean we will defer Duntroon? Because what the officers have proposed is that we delay one to finance the other in the short term.
the problem with Hampden is that people are waiting, their lives are on hold. With Duntroon, that's not the case. So, yeah, I think if that has to be the one, if that's what staff say is the project that has to be delayed, then that gets delayed. But we need to get the answer back to Hampden community. Is this something that we can do or not? We need to do those studies, and then it's a definitive yes, it will happen, and here's the time frame, or it's no, it's just going to be too unaffordable or technically just not possible. So that's, I think, pretty much the options on that. I'm not sure if Mr. Hope wants to comment any further, or Mr. Rendell.
No, I think you've summarised it very well. I mean, these are what look like relatively, in the grand scheme of things, small value projects, but they require a great deal of time and effort because there is a significant amount of community engagement involved with them. So that's why the Duntroon project was suggested, because it was, again, had a similar allocation of staff time to what we believe will be required in Hampden. So that's why it was suggested as the thing that would need to be deferred if Hampden was given priority.
Okay, Councillor Blackler.
Supportive of the Hampden scheme being added in, but I just wanted around the topic of allocation of staff time. How does the Oho project compare with, say, Duntroon?
Vastly more. But what we've got, that would be to fully resolve the matter in OHA. Whereas what we're proposing is just very gently moving it along. So we haven't allocated a lot of staff time to that in the next 12 months.
Thank you.
Okay, parking we've done, and the sports and event centre we will, well, I guess from a budget point of view, money in, money out, it seems there's reasonable assumptions as can be made based on if the project goes ahead, and that there's a start in the 2024 on the construction. So has anyone got any concerns on that? It's a bit like this year budget for money coming in from grants and so on that didn't come in. It looks like we've got a deficit because we haven't met that budget, but this is trying to just get it as accurate as possible.
So just as a point of clarification, so there's no doubts in the community, are we proposing to put in this year's budget 10 or 15 million? I mean, I take the point that it's conditional and provisional and dependent upon reports we are yet to receive, but which number is going in the annual plan?
The number we decide on possibly the 13th of June.
Right.
Or the 27th of June.
So it's not making a call on that today.
That's what I said earlier.
Right,
yeah.
okay.
Unless you want to make a call.
No.
What are you proposing, Councillor Hopkins?
I didn't say 50 minutes.
Okay, any support for Councillor Hopkins?
That's what
Okay, that's the end of that page.
sorry.
Oh, Councillor Blacker, sorry.
Did we make a final decision regarding the shuttle service support, or did we agree that that would come later? The problem is knowing what actually is needed. I mean, it's a stab in the dark as to whether it's needed, how much is needed, and so on. So I think that's just something we're going to have to try and get more clarity on, and talking through to the service provider and some of those aspects of things, talking to St John and to ORC about when's the likely start of any service from either of them. Okay, Mandy, where are we next? Or Mr. Hope?
Yeah, I think it's probably worth noting, sorry, his screen disappeared, but that all of those changes actually just dropped the rate requirement, just below overall rate increase requirement to that 795. Really due the last two there, the 50 and the 40, really helped it just move that little bit under 8%. So really there's nothing else to be decided upon that would have a rate impact. And so that's essentially what would be going out to the public in the annual plan document, as was highlighted by Federated Farmers once again. That's just the overall rate requirement. Every individual will see a movement quite different from that. I think, yeah, as I noted, particularly in the rural sector, probably going to see matters in double digits because they are having less of the insulative effect of the holding the water and sewer rates were they at their current levels. So that's probably, you know, certainly more of an impact in the urban areas as opposed to the rural. But yeah, it's slightly down and under 8%. So not sure if that helps with the marketing of it, but that's the position we'll be in. And now it's really just onto the project schedules. Sorry, I will carry on, Mandy. The water one, that's just confirming really pretty much a previous decision when you did review the revised water program, and hopefully don't have to spend too much more time on the longer project list, as it has had a couple of pretty good batterings so far. So
Duntroon is in there still, is it? So slight change with that one. Not too much different along the way. Councillors, Councillor Blackburn and Councillor Hopkins.
Thanks, Mayor Kircher. I just had a question with respect to the available FTEs for project delivery. Is this list of projects based on what is achievable, inclusive of the things that are being carried forward?
That was certainly the basis that was prepared on, but 12 months is going to be a long time in the water space in terms of, I think, retaining staff, securing contractors, securing consultants, and any recruitment we're going to do, but based on our best understanding of current availability, both in the market and internally, we believe that the things that are going to be carried forward in the water space, most of those are underway at the moment. So a couple of big ones are like the work in Western and the work in Kakanui that are just getting underway now, or have been going for a while, but they certainly had sort of an 8 to 12 month delivery program. So we'll be carrying forward, and they are reasonably sized. So yeah, we believe that really with the decisions about resourcing that have been put into the three water space, that this program will mostly be achievable. The concerns that were raised in the public forum about cost increases, I mean, anything that goes outside of sort of permitted budget round limits will come back to council for a further decision. But I think, particularly the reticulation works, the way the market is at the moment, I think pretty confident about those prices at some of the other ones. So it's the best estimate at the moment, but it will be pretty live, and we will keep updating the governance team as we work through that at a minimum quarterly basis.
Just quick question before we go to the recommendations. The emergency management side of things, what have we included in that, or have we included anything?
At this stage, it's just sitting at the proposed project of 100,000.
Okay. My suggestion is that we looking at resilience building in our communities and preparing for major events, looking at the need to make sure that we've got halls suitable for welfare centres, that we've got communications spread around the district that's going to help build resilience into that. Things like Starlink or sat phones in particular places, allowing for power to continue in halls if power goes out. It's my proposal that we allocate up to $250,000 funded from the disaster fund to invest in building that resilience. Happy to have your thoughts on that. Councillor Cowles.
Thanks, Mayor Kuchar. Yeah, look, I fully support you on that. It's something that we've been talking about a long time for these halls. We've had our presentation around AFA. The time is ticking to some degree. We've had our flooding last year where our communities were blocked off for a couple of days, and had that continue for another couple of days, we would have had to start implementing some of these things where we needed to be able to look after our community a little bit better. So I would certainly support looking at that, particularly the resilience around our halls with heating and power for cooking and those sorts of things that will become a central sort of a point for those sorts of things in any form of disaster.
Thank you, Councillor McCone.
Yeah, sorry, I'll just go back to the water for a second. Michael might be able to answer this. The backflow prevention plan, Michael, that's up for $1 million. What does that actually do?
Can we come back to that?
Yeah,
did you have a comment on the disaster fund?
No, I had a couple of questions on the projects.
Oh, okay.
No.
So councillors on that emergency management fund, general, okay on that? I mean, it might not get spent, but it's about talking with how we can build the resilience. Okay, so we include that. So Councillor McCone, you were asking a question of Mr. Goldingham.
Apologies there. What was that project question?
So I said there's $1 million there for backflow prevention. I presume that's on demand deliveries. It won't be on restricted deliveries.
No, not unrestricted. That is a program we've started some years ago. We're into the construction phase of that, so we want to carry that on. Very important in our compliance aspect of water supplies. There is an amount in the restricted, but the restricted itself is a backflow preventer in itself. So no, we're not going to rural supplies on it.
Councillor Hopkins.
Yeah, two questions. One on page 38, one on 39. Assets Group Roading 1458 entrance signage for townships, and then it says that it looks as though is that going to be managed by Roading? I'm slightly puzzled because I thought last time we had those entrance signs, they were actually developed by Tourism Waitaki, and I would have thought if they're going to those are the ones that are being redesigned. Won't be Roading that redesigns them, will it?
No, it won't be Roading that redesigns them, but that's where that budget sits, being that it's a roading activity. But it is probably likely to move over to our economic development unit to look at that piece of work. Yeah.
Thank you. The other question I had on also on Roading on the next page 39, project 2492, unsealed road metalling financially assisted. And I'm trying to work out, we've got 111,000, I think, for this year, and it looks like 773,000 for the year after. So what unsealed roads are going to be metal? In other words,
I don't think we've got the answers to that at the moment. So it's a level of detail that we've been through as far as we've gone through all those projects already before. And to actually list off what roads are going to be done is they probably don't know yet. And it's certainly a task for the roading subcommittee to look at once Jim Thompson stops swanning around Australia and gets back to the country.
sorry, I don't mean to be confrontational, but if we have allocated the thick end of $1 million and we can't even say what it's going to be spent on and where, then I'm actually surprised that we're allocating that amount of money before we've determined in what locations it will be expended. And no one at this table can answer the question, what is that money going to be spent on?
It's more about time. I'm trying to get through time, and Mr. Rendell has got an answer, but we have lots of budgets which we don't give all of the detail exactly where it's going to be spent, but that'll be provided in due course, I'm sure. So go back to the recommendations, councillors, and we've got 1 through 5. Is someone happy to move those, acknowledging the changes we've made along the way today?
They will be listed.
Councillor Cowles, move that. Councillor Linwood, second that. Any further discussion? Okay, and put it to those in favour, say aye. And against, that's carried. And I was going to move an additional motion around acknowledging the decision on the event centre being made later, but I think I've commented on that enough to that people realise that. So we'll now move to the next item, small matter of deciding whether we're entity I or entity J. Thank you very much to all the staff on the annual plan discussion. I know there's only some of you here, but thanks should be passed on to all of the people involved. He's not wanting to speak though.
Well, that's up to you.
He's not wanting to.
No, he has not said it was.
Okay, right, item 5.3, water entity membership. Mr.
I'll acknowledge it's a relatively brief report on a relatively important item, but was a bit time constrained. We do need to get a preference communicated back to the minister. We probably, as officers, didn't go too much past line item 1 in the table, which is the potential very different financial impact we'll have on the community depending on which entity we join. Although the absolute numbers, they're certainly debatable, but I think the quantum between the two is very clear, and it was also sort of every piece of work that we've seen coming out from a couple of different ways comes up with really answers that are in the same magnitude. So did try to consider some other matters, but didn't really believe that they really outweighed that first line. So very happy to answer questions, but yeah.
So I know Councillor McCone's very keen to make sure that we don't all have to start wearing Crusaders jerseys.
So is that a per annum or is that stretched out over 30 years and it's an inflation adjusted number?
That's where it would get to after 20 or 30 years, but it is a per annum number.
So sorry, so right now, if everything comes into place, that will be my account for this coming 12 months.
No, it'd be less than that, but it would rapidly get to that kind of magnitude.
Councillor Holding.
Just on the Te Runanga's preference, what would the impact would be making the decision today if they came back and the preference wasn't? That was because they're waiting to hear back from Karitani, are they?
Yeah, I mean, we communicated with them and we haven't had a response back yet, so we not really sure what that. I think it's been indicated informally, but we haven't had something formal back, so no, can't really say one way or the other.
Councillor McCone.
Yeah, on that context, sadly, I would agree option 1's looking far more attractive than I thought it would. And the other, from a practical point of view, our source of most of the water for the top end of the Waitaki District comes out of the Waitaki Valley, Waitaki District, and in reticulation goes into Otago. But if we don't have the source, we don't have reticulation. So until legislation or politics comes in and changes it, I don't think we've got too many options.
Are you happy to move? No. I mean, step too far. Okay, Councillor Hopkins.
Well, having heard Councillor McCone's argument or conclusion, and I understand why he won't move it, and I may run the risk of being unpopular, but we need to vote on the matter and resolve it. So I will move the 2 recommendations, 1 and 2.
Seconder. Councillor Linwood, thank you. for my 2 cents worth, I mean, it makes sense. The reality is the only difference it really makes is whether we're sitting around a table that's north of us or sitting around a table that's south of us. I think the big fundamental difference is the cost, and it some people get a bit concerned that Christchurch will have a lot of sway in the situation if it's a Canterbury West Coast one. Equally, Dunedin could, but the way that the representation groups are being set up is that every council has a voice and only one voice, which is more than what they had under the previous model, but it doesn't. It's not weighted to population, so Waitaki will have as much say as Christchurch does if we went north, and as much as Dunedin does if we went south. So, any other comments?
Mick, I would just briefly say that, I mean, we've had a lot of comment from ratepayers, including the new ratepayers residents group, about costs and the like. And this is it's an unpalatable option in the sense that it's being imposed on all councils by central government. But in terms of the finances, it's half as cheap. So those who want us to be more concerned about budgets and funding and finances would I hope understand the logic of this decision.
Councillor Blacklow.
Mr. Hope, I just wanted to understand, but based off your knowledge and understanding, what's the level of confidence in these figures that are presented?
As I said, the figures themselves.
Sorry, the difference.
No, I think, yeah, very confident about the difference. I mean, it's really just driven by population. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to put it. Those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Those against. That's carried. Thank you. Thanks very much, Mr. Goldingham. Okay, moving now to 5.4, adoption of the property strategy, and Mr. Farmley, do you want to speak to this?
Yeah, just whilst the team are coming in, I'll give a brief introduction to this. There's obviously a lot of information there, but I think a couple of things to highlight really is that the property that we hold is really important to the council in delivering services and delivering the outcomes you want as a council, but it's an enabler rather than an outcome on its own. And so the strategy is really looking at how we use our property, first of all, to deliver the outcomes you want and make sure it's directed at that, and do that in an efficient way. Previously, the council hasn't had a property strategy, and this has limited our ability to ensure that that property is being directed strategically at what you want as a council, and limited our ability to ensure that it is really efficient in its use. And so this is what this strategy enables us to do, really, if you adopt it today, is make sure that we're getting the most from our property in terms of the outcomes you want to achieve. I'd say a couple of other things just by way of detail. So the strategy aims to sort our property into categories, and you'll see in there's a surplus category, but just to emphasise that no property will be considered surplus until council formally resolves that. So there is only one property in that category at the moment that was formally resolved by the last council. And it will only do that once a process has been fulfilled, which includes engaging with the tenants of the property and any other stakeholders that are relevant to that. And I think that's really important to point out. So this is not making a commitment around disposing of properties today. It's about setting a direction, and any properties that are deemed surplus would go through that process, and it would be coming back to council for a formal resolution on that. The other thing I'd say is in terms of the scope, so it doesn't include every single property that we own. So it doesn't include the
I've just been asked by the mayor.
It doesn't include parks and reserves, and that's really around firstly the manageability of the exercise. Parks and reserves is a whole big task in itself. And also, Parks and Reserves is governed by, often by, different frameworks. So we see that, Parks and Reserves would be a separate exercise, a whole big task in itself to develop a strategy around that warrants its own attention. So it includes, our property outside of the Parks and Reserves. So that's it in summary. If you agree today, it gives us a really good basis to then move forward with our property. It'll help us prioritise the work and do it in a way that fits with your strategic direction, so that we can ensure that all our property is really contributing to what you want to achieve for the district, for the community, and that we can do that as efficiently as possible in what is a big cost area for the council.
Yes, indeed, it is a big cost area. I think the report indicates that it's actually costing us $4 million a year to have all the properties we do. Now, it may well be that some of those costs and that deficit is unavoidable, but the extent to which it can be reduced is going to help everyone. So questions or comments? The Mayor has asked me, by the way, to chair in his absence, so this isn't a takeover of any sort. So I'll take Councillor McCone. Oh, sorry, I'll take Councillor Linwood first and then Councillor McCone. Councillor Linwood?
I would just like to state that I don't feel overly comfortable having Forester Heights being listed as surplus. I know that the previous council did decide on that, but I'd just like to say, if it's possible, can we look at it again? I don't know if anyone else is in favour for that, but
I think it is purely in there because the previous council did resolve to dispose of it. I think if you wanted to revisit that decision, then we'd need to bring a whole paper back setting out, the pros and cons of selling versus retaining.
Well, it may be, point of clarification, it may be slightly premature to describe it as surplus, although the vote in the last council was to actually request officers to investigate potential revenue that might be gained from the sale, and the council would at that point determine whether it would proceed with sale or not, based on what it was advised might be produced or generated by way of income. So to the extent that that matter hasn't even come back to us at this point, it may be premature to identify it as surplus, but it's certainly there's no for sale sign up on Forester Heights at the moment. It would require councillors to resolve to revisit the matter for it to be reconsidered at this stage. I'll take Councillor McCone and then I'll hand back to the Mayor.
So it's more of a statement again. I don't accept this as a property strategy because we have not included any of the rural things. I know it's parks and gardens and everything else, but we are asked to make a decision and trim some costs down of an unprofitable property portfolio at the moment. So we need to look at all the options that are there and put them all together and sort the whole thing out right from, we keep delaying or putting it's in the too hard basket. But at some stage we've got to bite the bullet. So I think we should look at the lot and then we're more informed on our decisions.
Is there a question in there? No. Okay, right. Councillor Blackburn and then Councillor.
I just had a question along the same lines as Councillor Linwood around the classification currently sitting as surplus based on the resolutions on 28th of June 2022. It seems to me that we're preempting that the final decision to list it as surplus at the moment. From what I can see, we're investigating that option. Whether or not we just need to acknowledge that, or we shift it back to, say, strategic, for example, on the basis that it satisfies community and environment, then I'm happy to consider what others think there. But I just think it does need acknowledging that the final decision hasn't been reached.
Do you have any comments?
Through the chair, I just wanted to also acknowledge that through the surplus, even though it's probably the one legitimate property because it's gone through an approval process and a resolution, but even looking at the recommendations, there's still a lot of investigative work around that as well. So it's also a holding pattern, I suppose, and we would be keeping councillors up to date with any of the resolutions that we have to investigate as an outcome. So it is a bit of a holding pattern as well, but it's a legitimate surplus property because it has a resolution attached to explore the options of disposal. I guess
Thank
that's
you.
how we've framed it.
Yeah, well, I think it's a legitimate position to take because the investigations are about selling it. We haven't said that this is needed for strategic reasons and so forth. It was more around what the proposals might be for anyone looking to purchase that land and whether we agreed with them, not that there was an alternative use for it. So I think, yeah, that's what I would suggest on that one. Councillor Hopkins.
Yeah, I would probably, on balance, favour leaving it as it is at the moment. Councillors have an opportunity to present a notice of motion if they wish. But as I made the point when I was in the chair, no decision has actually been made regarding, no ultimate decision has been made. But I think the bigger, broader property picture, now that the whole community has got this document transparently in front of them as well as us, is that property is costing people a lot of money. And there's a lot of property that we probably don't need and that is probably actually contributing to the rates burden that people object to. So there has to be an honest confrontation or conversation, not confrontation, a conversation with the community about costings and solutions to the issues of affordability that they raise. And those issues of affordability are probably aggravated slightly by the fact that we've now got UNESCO geopark approval, because there's a visitor centre embedded in that idea that may cost money as well. A couple of questions I had with regard to other matters on the listing. On page 103, Holmes Wharf is identified as strategic. I would have thought that it should also be deemed or could be classified as commercial, because I know we've had business interest in some of the sheds, and there have been various proposals for use, and there are commercial users of that wharf now. So I question that clarification. And on page 104, 7 Thames Street, Oamaru, is identified as commercial, rightly so. But it's no longer the Steam Cafe. It needs to be corrected. It's now the Victoria Lounge. As a matter of fact, that needs to change.
Mr. Endo.
Yep, thank you, Mayor Kitcher. With respect to the classification of Holmes Wharf, yes, completely agree. There are some commercial components to the facility and certainly some unexplored commercial possibilities. However, that property is unlikely to ever pay for its own costs, purely because of the amount of costs associated with maintaining the wharf. However, yes, we'll certainly take on point the comment regarding Steam Cafe and change that.
A couple of other questions, if I may. On page 143, I think, we're told that the airport in the strategy lost 180, it had a deficit of operational deficit of $80,000. And yet if you look, I think on the next page, financial year 2022, income from the farms in the airport is 506,000 and expenditure is 395, which means the fact that the airport as a totality is actually making money. And so how does a deficit of $80,000 come when expenditure is over 100,000 less than income?
Would you like to respond to that?
Sorry, Councillor Hopkins, can you just clarify which page that's on?
It's on page 143 of the strategy. Oh, sorry, 143 of the agenda, apologies.
Page 33 of the second document, I think.
Yeah, and so it's 32 and 33 of the document itself. Shows an the operating position on the first page is shown as losing 80,000, I think. And on the next page, revenue and expenditure are as I identified.
So I believe that's because on the first page, it's showing the cost of depreciation in there, whereas on the second page, it isn't. It's just showing the pure operational costs and operational income. So you're looking at two different things there. So that the first one reflects the true overall costs, whereas the second page is just the annual operating costs without the depreciation.
Okay, thank you. Councillor McCone.
Yeah, again, a bit more clarification, please. So on page 71 with your graphs, it says we've got 410 sites, excluding parks and reserves plus road and water, which don't really. So what do we have in total? And on the graph right next to it, it says that 51% of our 160 sites are land. So could there be some clarification? And the point I'm getting at there, with all this rural land, we have an opportunity to start to get that to earn some income rather than just sit there and be an nice as a pocket. So we need to identify some of this stuff, please.
Mr. Scott.
Through the chair. So the classification of land was the initial classification that was made by the consultant at the outset of the property strategy as a new lens that they applied to the portfolio before they moved into what is the current classification of the properties that the team that I work for controls. The number of 410 in terms of sites was merely pulled from the fixed asset register around specific land entries. So we are dealing with 159, I believe, sites at the end of the day, which had been classified as per the strategy. Does that answer your question?
Mr. Palmer,
well, I was going to say, I think Councillor McCain's a strong advocate for the strategy because that's exactly the sort of thing we need to be doing now that we've got a categorisation of the property and a better understanding of what our portfolio is, because this hasn't been done before. We haven't had this full understanding of the portfolio and what sort of return it's generating, either in terms of community outcomes or revenue. And so the next steps that are set out in here is really to have a programme working through that portfolio and determining how we can get the most value out of it and reduce the cost of the overall portfolio and the individual properties by either generating further income or lowering the cost of operating that, or determining whether it's actually surplus because it's either not generating enough in terms of strategic return or revenue return to the council. So it's good to hear your advocacy.
That covers part of it, but what I'm probably really asking is that everything that we have in that whole strategy, so everything that's got a title with it, is that all, every piece of property and dirt that's related to the Waitaki District Council, is it in here?
So in my introduction, I said it doesn't include the parks and reserves at this stage. So there is a lot of other property in the parks and reserves that haven't been included in this strategy, given that it's a complex area and would make it a massive piece of work in itself. So to be able to move forward, we've not included that at this stage.
So some of those areas are leased out for grazing and so on. So some of them do make money for us. How much that is, don't know. But that's it's certainly one of my concerns is that we are looking at a property strategy that should cover all of the property, not just the bits that the property department look after. But I accept and incorporating all that other stuff is a major bit of work, but I'd certainly like to see how we're going to progress the inclusion of all of that other property. So any property that we look after one way or another is actually included in there. And as has happened already with what we've got, is the categorization of those is clear, which would give us confidence to let staff get on with it, because we can see that we've set the template for them, or the framework for them to make decisions that align with what our vision is to deliver from property. Councillor Blackler and then Councillor Percival.
Just supportive of those comments. I understand we've just got to make a start with something. So we just need to get going. But it would be beneficial, I think, if we could see a GIS overlay with all council properties and then what properties are actually considered within the scope of this, just so that we understand the scale of what's in and out. Equally, where you guys are coming back to us as a result of this, to engage further on the classification of stuff. So we're still only in the initial steps of the process, I guess. This is just the starting point. So, yeah, but I think having a visual of how it all sits would be beneficial. That's just a general comment, but with respect to on page 89, strategic assets, I think there's an important point there that the last sentence, which says in future council may consider opportunities to acquire or repurpose. I think that's something that we shouldn't overlook, and that we're not too hasty about considering whether things are surplus, but also considering whether we can add on to things to further enhance the benefit there. And then probably just another comment on page 95 with the implementation roadmap. I just wonder how in a practical sense that might look, that second to last step where elected members approve to move something to surplus. At that decision point for the process not to be too cumbersome, do we have to basically provide what would be a minimum test or threshold for us to actually approve that something leaves our possession as surplus?
Yeah, thank you. Yes, for a property to move to surplus and for us then to explore opportunities for disposal, a report would need to come back to council and council would have to approve the change. So that obviously need to be a case for that change outlined within the body of the report, and council itself would need to be satisfied with making that recommendation or that change.
Sorry, so supplementary that I guess what I'm trying to say is we've approved in principle that something is surplus, but because we haven't yet gone out to the market to try to achieve something, we don't actually know what we might yield from the process. And so my question is, if we don't know that, would there then be a feedback loop back to us?
So I think the simple answer is probably. It depends what it is. So if it's something relatively minor, you might delegate it subject to certain parameters, and then we'd have to bring it back if it didn't meet that parameter. So yeah, if it's a small piece of property, you might set a threshold of, it needs to deliver this sort of return and delegate it. But if it's something significant, then you'd probably want it to come back for final approval in terms of the terms to make sure that you're getting what you wanted from it and the level of return.
Through the chair, also, I want to assure you that through the reporting process, we would intend to give you a heads up on some of the properties we might be investigating, just so that there's no surprises as well as we go through the process.
I think there's concern that, the devil is in the detail and we don't know what the detail is because it's not intended to be a detailed plan. So it's having as Councillor Blackford's trying to do, establish how will the process look, what will it be, so that we do have, whatever oversight along the way to have confidence in the process.
And through the chair, through the implementation process, we would look to be creating policies which we would work with you on as well, so that we have clear, concise processes. And through the reporting process, we can determine, or you can advise us as well, what works best for you as far as your position with the GIS maps and things like that. And also your point before about looking at properties and not always that they'll be deemed surplus. There might be an idea that a property will be retained for future community use, or there could be an opportunity to look at acquisition, but that will all be dealt with through the implementation and policy process that we end up with through working collaboratively with council.
Just before I go to Councillor Thompson, some of the, and I'm sorry if these have been raised before, but some of the categorisation of some buildings are based on what they're currently being used for. Like there's some buildings that currently we're using for storage, and so they become operational currently. But then a building like Community House, which is delivering on a bunch of our wellbeing outcomes for the community, is listed in other buildings where I'd say it's quite strategic, that one. And that won't change unless Community House gets another home, which they're looking for, something bigger and better. So there's the challenge of, just where some of those are sitting, and it might be a detail, but it's a concerning detail if we haven't got that sorted. The drill hall, we know there's challenges there, but understanding that currently it's actually providing wellbeing outcomes for us. So again, that's the current use for it. And I guess having a process, what do we do around the 100 and 200 people who are using that currently? Community House I mentioned there. I mean, the RSA, it could potentially be a very good strategic or commercial opportunity, but it's currently sitting in other assets. We've got areas of around the harbour that are nominally at least identified as being opportunities for commercial development, getting that balance between public and commercial areas. But there's no mention of that. But is it something that can be developed through with the harbour area subcommittee, perhaps, that can better set out where those places might be? So it's looking at how we progress things, having faith in that, because at the moment I don't feel we've ended up with what I hoped we would, which was a strategy that's very clearly set out exactly how things are going to be. And that might be expecting perfection, and we shouldn't. But it's having faith that we've got the right process now to deal with it. I do want to see parks and reserves and so forth included in there, because they're properties we manage, and most of them will be strategic or essentially strategic, I think fits under, because that we always want them to be there for public recreation. Then there's others that we're managing which are leased out and so on. So there's a commercial aspect there. So over time, hopefully we'll be able to incorporate those. But I see this, if we're going to adopt something today, I think it's a stage 1 strategy, and with the expectation stage 2, we'll start incorporating those other things over time. Mr. Palmer?
There's a lot in there that you raised, so
yeah.
I'd sort of respond by saying this is a strategy. It's not a plan that details what we're going to do with every single property. It's meant to give us the direction. That's what the strategy is meant to do, give us direction. And there's a whole program of work that, if you adopt this today, then needs to be developed in terms of how we deal with individual properties, and we do it in a manageable way. And that program of work is going to take years. So if we wanted a plan that set out all the detail of what we're going to do with every property, it's not this council that's going to agree it. It's going to be a future council that agrees that. There's a lot of work to do to be able to do that. And part of that process is working through looking at whether something in one category can be moved to another category, and you raise the RSA building, and it's categorized as operational, and this is for example, because that's how it's currently being used. But it says in the notes that it has the potential, if we can overcome some of the restrictions, to become a strategic property that's contributing more to the community and your aspirations for the community. So that's if you agree this today, this sets out that direction. I think there's a high-level program of work there that's set out, and I think what we'd need to do is, if you agree it, then come back and say, well, this is how we think it will move forward, and at what points we'd want to engage with you on that, which includes really if we're going to change the categories of any of these buildings, that's consciously done by the council. As part of that process, so that you are agreeing the category change and understanding the rationale behind it and how it fits with the strategy you've agreed, if indeed you do agree today.
Okay, Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd actually, I welcome the start of the process. I think that the strategy is a good starting point. But we need to acknowledge that, as Mr. Palmer just has, that there's far more work to be done. There will be down the track opportunities for us to make political decisions on some particular buildings, and that's what we were elected to do. I do have a wry amusement that some new councillors have already been lobbied by particular interest groups. Obviously, I didn't get a letter. I'm disappointed by that, but I would caution that what we are at now is not a finishing point, but a starting point. I think going forward, there's an opportunity for council to realise on a whole lot of opportunities. And I just throw one in that is specifically not acknowledged that we haven't talked about, but there's a vast amount of paper roads within our district that over time could possibly be disposed of, as council has dealt with some occasionally in the past. So I think that we accept the strategy as presented today as a starting point, and realise that as we work forward, hopefully things will become more obvious.
Okay, thank you. Councillors, we've got 3 minutes left of this meeting. Might take slightly longer than that. Councillor Hopkins and then Councillor Percival, you were next. Then Councillor Hopkins, then Councillor McCone. Sorry.
Yeah, I was just supportive of Councillor McCone's approach to the rural holdings that we have and the potential for long-term benefits with those properties, as in forestry and carbon credits and goodness knows what's happening these days. Councillor Blacklow also mentioned if we actually had the overlays to show us what we do own, because over the years I've been here, I've been absolutely amazed at what we do own in different places, and some being little pockets here and there, which, as Jim just Councillor Thompson just mentioned, that could be got rid of off our portfolio just for selling them to the neighbour for $1 or something. But then again, we've gone through that exercise before, and survey costs were far exceeded what benefit we'd have by just on the rates alone that we're swapping over. But it's very urbanised, which is fair enough too, because that's where their value is. But I think there's a big potential in looking at what's rural and our quarries and land that actually at the moment is leased, perhaps in the long term would have far greater benefits into forestry or something else. So that's where I sit, but I think John and both Tim had good points.
Thank you, Councillor Hopkins.
Yeah, very briefly, I don't know, I did raise a matter with the team who prepared this document about having something in here about if you like, a commitment to design for flagship buildings. And I do notice on page 41 of the strategy under culture and heritage, we talk about supporting a strong relationship between the council and community based on trust, understanding and shared aspirations. And then we also talk about protecting and enhancing land and buildings that are culturally or historically significant to supporting the identities of Ngāi Tahu, the local Runaka and wider communities. I would like to see us add something that says that we also commit to quality design or sympathetic design for flagship or major council buildings should any be developed in the future. I do believe that with the architectural heritage we have here, that we should make a public commitment to honouring that with maybe 21st century variations and versions of the 19th century heritage we enjoy.
Councillor McCone.
Sorry, just a couple of requests really. If there is a list of everything we own, could someone email it to me? I'd like to study it, would be the first question. But secondly, as far as the rural thing goes, and just reiterating what Guy said, if we can identify those things early, I think we need to move reasonably quickly, because that is an opportunity we can actually start returning money back to this council in a way of investment and income. And the old adage is the seed won't grow in the bag. So if you start planting it today, it starts growing tomorrow. But if it takes 5 years to get there, you're 5 years behind. So I think we need to seriously look at some of that stuff that's out there.
Okay. Lots of good comments. Where to?
Recommendations.
Oh, okay. Right.
Your worship.
Councillor Hopkins, yeah, okay. You're moving 1 and 2.
Yes.
Do we have a seconder? Councillor Holding.
I have a question, perhaps, Mr. Palmer. Some of the comments and questions that have been raised today, can they be incorporated? If we adopt this now, can there be slight amendments to it based on the comments and questions today or not?
Do you want to list which ones you want included? Because there've been lots of comments and questions today, and I think some of those comments and questions, I think, are things we need to resolve in as we go through the process of implementation. If you adopt it, I said, I envisage that we would, be coming back to you as part of that process. This is about setting a direction. I think, we can resolve a lot of those through that engagement coming back to you rather than amending today. But if there's anything specific you want to amend in here, I think we need clarification rather than a sort of a general amend as we see fit based on lots of comments and questions today.
Do you see any merit in incorporating some commitment to quality design as part of the strategy?
Through the chair, I think it would be difficult for us today to commit to that without investigating that further. It's something we can investigate through the implementation process, which is what this is. It's promoting an investigation. We'll have up-to-date information on our properties and we can address things like that as we go through it.
Thank you.
If you're wanting specifics, 29 Elm Street's listed as council residential accommodation. We bought that to put community housing on originally, and some of the purposes get lost along the way. Same as the shops around Itchin Street. It was council decision that they get used for community purposes and turned into a retail without any change. So I guess there's aspects like that. I definitely want to see the recategorization of the drill hall, community house, and the RSA as being strategic at the moment rather than sitting in another property, because I think they're too important to be there, and we definitely do not want to send the message that we're looking at anything other than looking after the people that are using those facilities, those first 2 facilities in particular. And until we get the status of the RSA, we should assume that it's going to be, have a strategic use, I believe, even though it's just being used for storage at the moment.
Through the chair, I think we all understand that RSA is going to be quite a complicated investigative process without even knowing at this point what we can do with it in the future. So that's sort of why we put it into that pot, because we want to start then investigating at what we can unlock there and then look at what options will be available for the future use of the site.
Yeah, and this isn't aimed at you. That's, I think a lot of us sitting around this table believe that's been happening for the last 4 or 5 years, and we've been giving assurances to the community that investigations are being had about how we unlock that and remove the status of the land or change the status of the land or remove the impediments there. So it's an absolute concern that it sounds like we've done nothing, and that's a challenge to me, at least. I'm not sure about councillors.
So I just want to respond to that again. One of the purposes of this strategy is that we've got too much to deal with, and so we need to prioritise that. And the RSA is listed as in that tranche 1 of priorities to deal with. And I think we just had an overstretch in terms of resources to be able to move everything forward at the same time. So the need for the strategy is, about, clarifying priorities, not just categorization, so that we can have a work program that is within our resources. The alternative to that is if you want to move everything forward all at once, we need more resources. But, as we've had the discussion on the annual plan, we want to, keep rates affordable and not provide more resources. So we need a work plan that's manageable. And that's what this intention of this strategy, or one of the intentions, is to make sure we've got a manageable work plan that reflects your priorities.
Yeah, exactly. Totally agree. So I need to see if the support for moving community house and the drill hall to being strategic assets is a direction we want to take.
May I speak to that?
Yep.
Personally, my view is that the explanations given for the reasons why they are classified as they are at the moment are valid and sensible. I think the key matter to actually address here is community concern. And if we say explicitly today, they are not on the market, anyone who says they are on the market is misleading you, then, and we are committed absolutely to ensuring that the wellbeing benefits of all buildings are preserved and maintained. Whether they're preserved under one particular roof or another one is a matter for at some point in the future. The key thing is to ensure that the wellbeing benefits are preserved and, if necessary, enhanced. And it may well be that relocating in some instances may actually achieve that. So I don't see changing the label as achieving or addressing or anything. And I'm personally think that the logic of the classification that currently applies is valid and should stay.
We're trying to transform council to actually look at, rather than being insular and looking at silos approaches to things. We're trying to look at how we prepare ourselves for future for local government and what our role might be. Having other organisations and housing them to deliver on our well-beings is a part of what our strategy should be. If it's not, we're going to be doing a well-being strategy, and if part of that is not enabling community organisations, then what are we doing? We're housing community enough because they're delivering on social well-being. We've got the drill hall delivering on physical well-being for a lot of our young people, along with the other benefits that brings with ATC, the trampoline club, gymnastics. I mean, these are buildings that have a strategic purpose. And if we want to change them to something else, then we need to find homes for the people in them. And so, I just can't see why we wouldn't link what we're trying to deliver here to other purposes, just as we link community housing through to the social well-being that we provide to the residents there. So, it's getting away from silo thinking, linking our strategies together, which just talks about, but doesn't seem to follow through on. It's my concern. We can leave them where they are if that's what people want to do, but I just think we've got an opportunity to improve it slightly.
Just on the back of your comments, Mayor Kircher, my understanding is that this is the classification of property as the consultants have listed throughout the process, but it's by no means the final. Our step now is to use this kind of methodology to work our way through all the properties to land on our final position. So will that process at some point involve the governance team to look back over that? And if so, we perhaps don't need to be so concerned about where everything sits specifically at this point.
Well, I thought I heard Mr. Palmley say we need to give direction now.
I'm sure there's somewhere in this document that basically says that. I just can't find. I read it again last night, but I'm sure it said something about now the step for us is to actually apply the logic of the strategy across our property.
Yeah, that's what's set out in the delivery there, is we tackle it in tranches of properties, and I think most of those properties mentioned are in the first tranche to be looked at, and the classification is as it stands, but that as I said earlier, if there's a desire to see how they can be used, more strategically, because we want to retain them, then, that is, something that we can do. And, the intention is, as I set out earlier, that the governance team will be, involved in that process, that we won't change things, agreed today. We won't change things without the governance team being involved in, signing off that.
Well, so I guess supplementary to that, if we look at the classification of 2 Harbour Street, for instance, the way that's classified, I just need to find what page that's on now. It's currently classified as commercial, and I just wonder, on the back of our conversations this morning around the repurposing of the ground rental to go towards the interest component, would that sit under a commercial classification, or should that land be classified as strategic based on the service that it's providing?
I'd say that's still commercial because they're paying a commercial rent. We're just funding the other grant out of it. So, well, it's commercial rent. That's still appropriate.
Okay.
I believe.
I'm just not sure whether we need to be concerned about the subtleties at this point or not.
Well, yeah. I seriously am concerned that when we don't deal with the subtleties, then, and you end up with a filter that's not actually working the way that we might want it to work. And so that's why I'm raising those particular ones and talking about linking it to other strategies that we have, or purposes that we have in local government. So anyway, if people are happy with it as is, we will just proceed. So does anyone else want to speak to Councillor Thompson?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Look, I agree with what you're saying, but I think what we've done is we've shifted ourselves from a governance to an operational space in this conversation. And I think what we need to be doing is saying, we accept this as a beginning document, but we will come back to you with a political oversight on some specifics and give officers direction of what we see, rather than us spending time here today debating building by building.
Yeah, I think maybe you missed the point. I mean, it is good governance to link strategies together, and we're not doing that here. But that's what I'm saying. But I'm going to put the motion. So those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
And those against, that's carried. Okay, councillors, we're well behind time, but we'll don't have too much choice but to box on, I think.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Matt and Laurie. Have you anyone coming for the next item? Oh, you are. Okay. So we'll get through this one, the interim speed management plan, and then we'll figure out what we're going to do from there. So Roger, you've got this report with whatever amendments and so forth. I'm not sure if Mr. Hope wants to speak to it first.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So following our deliberations and hearings on the 2nd of May, there were some actions requested following the hearing, and that was to meet with Western School and confirm with them whether or not they would like to have variable speed limits as opposed to the permanent 30km/h speed limit for roll out the safe speeds around schools. So we met with Western School and they're happy with the proposal. We also met with Five Forks School to confirm that they were happy with the 60km/h speed limit, and they were also satisfied with that proposal. We also passed on feedback to Waka Kotahi resulting from the meeting, and we prepared a revised interim speed management plan, which is now ready to be presented to Waka Kotahi for certification.
Thank you. Councillor McCone.
Just a couple of quick questions. So the category 1 schools that you've identified in Western's been moved. The one you've got Duntroon in there, is that Livingston Street only? It doesn't include State Highway 8, and the same would apply to touch with State Highway 1. It's just the side roads as opposed to the main road.
Yes, that is correct. It's just Livingston Street. What we hope to do is when Waka Kotahi have their interim speed management plan certified, they have to do their own one, that we can combine it all together into one.
Any other questions? Councillor Blackman.
I'm not sure, based on the conversation at submission time, I'm not sure if it sits within the scope of this specifically or not, but I still feel uncomfortable about the early childhood centres that are not proximal to schools falling outside the scope of what we're trying to achieve here. And I accept that it doesn't form part of this process officially, but I don't see any reason why we can't make our own decision as council to extend the net a little wider.
Yes, through Chair. So after meeting with Western School, it was agreed with the principal that we could extend that zone up to the Western Play Centre. So what we are doing is wherever we can, we are extending the zones to incorporate early childhood centres wherever possible. But it is noted, and I have passed on your concerns as well to Waka Kotahi, just around what is the future steps for early childhood and kindergartens.
So, supplementary to that, so what can we do as an organisation as opposed to what Waka Kotahi can do around, say, for argument's sake, Holmes kindergarten?
So in our full speed management plan, which we will start developing later this calendar year, we will be selecting zones that can be put up for public consultation with, so it's not just going to be school speed zones, it could be other sections of roads that have been requested. So we can look at these outlying areas such as Holmes kindergarten as well for inclusion. That's no problem.
Okay, Councillor Hopkins.
Yeah, Roger, thank you for this. Just a couple of questions on what we are submitting to Waka Kotahi. In other words, the document that is going to them. I notice on page 5 of that document and page 185 of our agenda, we're saying council is committed to reducing road safety risks on our roading network to align with a shared objective to have 40% fewer deaths and serious injuries by 2030 compared to 2018 levels. And I'm just wondering, down the bottom it says that's a Vision Zero objective, but I'm not saying it's a bad thing to be committed to, but when did we commit to it? I have no recollection of that matter being voted on a council table at all.
Through the Chair, that is more of a nationwide goal set by Waka Kotahi from a central government perspective.
It is misleading, however.
We know the answer to this, Jim, and we don't need to spend any more time on it. We don't have governance oversight on some of these things, and we're saying we need to have them, and that's what the roading subcommittee is going to be dealing with.
Another question then. I notice next steps, and there's a reference there to a whole range of things, including various government decisions and so on. It also talks about the most recent government policy statement, which supports investment in highways and local roads to accelerate the implementation of the speed management guide, which focuses on treating the top 10% of the roading network. And that goes on to talk about the announcement on 13th of March 2023. The thing that strikes me about this document is that it seems to me that we're actually treating everything as if it was pre-13 March 2023 and not actually pulling back in the same way that the government has instructed Waka Kotahi to do nationwide. Why is that the case?
Through the Chair. So there is going to be a new or revised government policy statement released next month, which will take into account some changes that the government wish to go on. However, when we started this interim stream management plan, we were operating prior to 13th of March, as you've quite rightly said. We have sought advice from Waka Kotahi, and they have told us that we continue based on our planned path to reach this point. Because we are still achieving what we want, which is safe speeds around schools.
Councillor Percival, then Councillor Thompson. Your hand's gone down to Councillor Thompson.
Yeah, Roger, I'd just like to acknowledge all the time, patience and tolerance that you blokes have had in roading. This has taken about 4 or 5 years, to my knowledge, to get to where it is. I just congratulate you for your efforts on this.
Right. So do we have a mover for the recommendations? Councillor McCone, Councillor Cowles, thank you. Any further discussion? Those in favour say aye. Those against? It's carried. We're going to adjourn and we'll be having starting the park committee at 1 o'clock, so 20 minutes, eat fast. And at the end of the public session of the park committee, we'll have the last items of the of this council meeting. Thanks very much, everyone, and go have a quick break.